Story 1: Rabbits in the Creek. I'm writing this because my family won't talk about it anymore. I'm the only one who can't seem to forget. I was raised on the outskirts of Preston, a small town in southern Idaho with a population of around 5,000. My more immediate community was an isolated dead-end dirt road called Bear Creek. Less than 20 families lived on the Bear Creek. I didn't mind being so isolated. I grew up in the comfort of wide fields and close neighbors that only rural people know. We were a Mormon community, very church-centered, very community-centered. All the young girls, myself included, were part of the young women's group, and all of the boys were members of the local Boy Scout troop, which doubled as a church group in our area. We had 4th of July parties at the local ballpark and swam in the nearby reservoir. It was a good, quiet community. My house, a 92-year-old farmhouse built by my great-great-grandfather, was situated on a small hill surrounded by a wide grass field on one side and a snaking dirt road on the other. Across the road was the creek bottoms. Southern Idaho is categorized in a desert climate, so not much grows outside of the irrigated fields besides sagebrush and burrs. The creek bottoms were the exception. The creek fed the growth of a thick tangle of pussy willow bushes. In the late fall, we used to go down into the bottoms and pick the white, cottony pussy willow seeds to decorate the fences of our driveway. Being so isolated, it wasn't uncommon for animals to come down from the mountains. We had a female moose who brought her calf down and lived in our orchard every winter, and the occasional lion wasn't unheard of either. The summer when I turned 8, I remember because it was the same year as my baptism, a smaller mountain lion was spotted several times in our area. We weren't worried. The big cats stayed away from the farms and usually moved on when the area didn't yield enough food. The same summer, my neighbor, Peyton, was working on his Eagle Scout project. He loved National Geographic and thought it would be pretty cool to try putting together a National Geographic submission on our little creek bottoms. The young lion that happened to be in our area at the same time made him especially excited. He decided he wanted to try and get pictures of the lion and emailed the National Geographic team for advice. They recommended setting up an automatic camera that takes shots every couple of seconds in an area the lion was known to visit. They also recommended setting some kind of bait so the lion was more likely to come by. No one in the creek liked the idea of live bait or carrion, so we came up with a different kind of bait. We decided to set up an audio recording of a dying rabbit and play it on a loop through a set of speakers hidden in the willows. I remember when everyone was down in the bottoms testing the speakers, and I heard the noise for the first time. The sound of a dying rabbit is horrible. It's been described as being almost identical to the sound of a screaming child. If you've never heard it yourself, there's plenty of recordings available online. It's worth a listen. The camera was set up. The speakers were set up. Everything was perfect. Peyton explained that he would allow the camera and recording to play uninterrupted for a week, and then he would go check on it. This would give time for our scent to fade from the bottoms and encourage the lion to come closer. At first, I was worried about the noise. It was a truly horrible noise, and our house was the closest to the setup point in the bottoms. My father assured me that the noise wouldn't reach as far as our house, and I was relieved when we arrived home that night and he was correct. The bottoms were far enough away that I couldn't hear anything. I remember Peyton the next day at church. He was fidgety and excited to check on the equipment, but he had to wait a week, which everybody kept reminding him. He couldn't risk going down too early and scaring the lion away for good. That night I woke up to an awful noise. I sat ramrod straight in my bed with my eyes wide in the dark, hands clutched so hard my palms bore the indent of my fingernails for hours after. I knew that noise. It was the recording of the rabbit. It sounded faint and far off, like it really could have been coming from the bottoms. But that was impossible, because the recording had been going all night the previous day and I hadn't heard a thing. I didn't sleep that night. I was too scared to get out of bed and wake my parents. The recording played over and over again. I had the loop memorized. In the morning, I stumbled into the kitchen for breakfast. My mom and dad were sitting at the kitchen table. They too had dark rings under their eyes. I hadn't been the only one who'd heard it. Mom was convinced that the equipment must have been broken. She wanted to go down into the bottoms to check it out. Dad refused. He was a kind, gentle man and didn't want to stir up any unnecessary drama. He was sure there had been a strong wind last night, and the wind was carrying the noise farther than its natural reach. He told us to listen. We did. He was right. We couldn't hear it now. We forgot about it and went about our daily goings. The next night it happened again. I stayed up in bed with my back to the wall. The screaming was even louder than before, but this time something was different. It was lower pitched than I remember, and parts of the loop were slowed down, as if the recording were warped in places. At times, the loop did not loop naturally, and instead picked up at a random place, in the middle. My mom didn't mention anything at the breakfast table, but both her and my dad seemed tense. The third night, I mustered the courage to stand beside my bedroom window and look out into the yard. For a moment I stood, rooted to the spot, my hands shaking no matter how hard I clenched them. The noise sidled in through the cracks in the window. I watched the outline of the trees in the yard, perfectly still. Not even the slightest breeze stirred their branches. My mom announced that she would be going to visit her sisters in town the next day, and would probably spend the night there. She invited me to come along, but I was a daddy's girl at heart, and chose to stay at the farm. I took Mom's place beside Dad in their bed that night, but even that didn't help. I don't think my dad was asleep either, for he was unnaturally still the whole night. We began to hear the noise during the day too. I was drawing with chalk on the sidewalk when it happened. My shoulders tensed and the hairs on the back of my neck prickled. There was only one scream, a short, high-pitched one, and then the recording fell silent. It happened again several times throughout the day, but never the whole loop, just clips from it. Later that evening, Peyton's dad came up the driveway, on his four-wheeler. He said he was looking for their dog, a sweet yellow lab who had been missing since that morning. Dad said he was sorry, and that we hadn't seen her. I stared at him, silently begging him to mention the recording, but he didn't. He was a quiet man after all. He didn't want to bring up any unnecessary drama. Mom stayed away the whole week. Dad and I didn't sleep. By Saturday, the screaming could be heard constantly, though it seemed to have deviated from the familiar loop entirely. I didn't recognize any of it. Sometimes the screams were thin and long. Other times they were hardly more than growls. Once, while my dad had been heating up meatloaf for lunch, the noise rose into such a rancorous din that he dropped the plate and it shattered. I pressed my hands over my ears where I sat at the table and squeezed my eyes shut, but it didn't help. The noise forced its way in through the cracks of my fingers and pinched my throat and rattled in my rib cage. The din lasted for a whole minute, then fell silent. Dad was shaking. That was the last we heard of the noise that day. Peyton came by Saturday evening to ask permission to cross our road to collect the equipment. He was so excited. I watched him disappear into the creek bottoms with a sense of tired relief. After the equipment was gone, it would all stop. I couldn't wait to get a full night's sleep. Not a minute later, I spotted Peyton coming back up from the creek. I was confused. It had taken us much longer to set up the camera and speakers, so I'd only assumed it would take just as long to collect them. My breath stilled when Peyton came closer. He didn't look right. His eyes were wide and his face pale. Something wet dribbled from his chin and onto his shirt. I later realized it was vomit. My dad caught him before he fell and demanded to know what had happened. Peyton couldn't speak. He just cried. We called his dad. I looked after Peyton as both my dad and his dad went into the bottoms. They were gone a long time. When they returned, their faces were grim, and they smelled funny. I noticed red on my dad's hands. I asked what was wrong, but they brushed right past me and immediately called the police. Nobody would tell me what had happened. I sat on the couch as a blur of neighbors and police officers swirled around me. At one point, an officer placed something on the kitchen table and left. I looked into the kitchen curiously. It was the camera from the bottoms. I wish I hadn't looked. The camera was a little banged up. Tiny scratches and dents covered the plastic casing. When I lifted it, my hand stuck to the plastic. Something tacky and odorous covered the screen, but it turned on fine. The first set of photos were normal. Just the pussy willows cast green in the glow of the night setting. As I continued to click through them, they quickly became strange. At one point, the camera angle changed as if the camera had been knocked from its post. Grass now obscured most of the frame. Flecks of red appeared on the lens and remained for the rest of the sets. One photo made me pause. There was a figure in this one, or half of a figure, as most of the upper torso hadn't made it into the frame. I thought it could be human, but it didn't look like it should be standing upright. Its legs were twisted, like an animal, and it seemed to be having difficulty supporting itself in an upright position. Beside the legs, a long, thin arm hung. Whatever it was must have been stooped over, for its fingertips hung below its crooked knees. The next set was different. It was as if the camera had been picked up and was now being held. The first photo was of the bottoms at night. The next startled me. I had to look closely before deciding what it was. A rabbit had been laid in the bushes, but its ears and most of its scalp had been peeled away. The next was of the same rabbit, but a thin, dark hand was holding it up against the sky. Its limp body hung like something from a nightmare. In the following photos, more rabbits joined the one, each with their ears and scalp removed. Then a cat, then more cats, then a dog, the yellow lab, then the lion. The following photo was of 7 rabbits, 3 cats, 1 dog, and the lion all laid, out in a row facing the same way. Their arms and legs had been arranged as if they were marching, like some parade. All of their scalps had been removed and tiny white glints of their skulls could be seen. The last photo was overly bright, like the photo had been taken too close, with the flash on. An eye dominated the frame, but it was yellowed and crusty and had a bar pupil like a horse. In the bottom corner, the edge of a mouth could be seen. No lips, just teeth. Sharp and little, with wide gaps of red gum between them. I wish I hadn't looked. I heard my dad talking to the police outside. They said the speakers had malfunctioned. The recording had only played the first night. 12. Steps. Danny knew he had made a mistake in coming, but he took a seat nonetheless. All of the Alcoholics Anonymous meeting on his side of town seemed warm and welcoming. All of the people were friendly and knew him by name. There were hugs, handshakes, slaps on the back. The rooms were well lit with comfortable chairs. There were always freshly baked cookies or donuts. A recent falling out with his sponsor, Ralph, had caused Danny to choose to avoid some of his normal meetings, though. He had already been down to 2 meetings a week, which Ralph had so poignantly called him to the carpet on, so he didn't want to cut those out completely. He had been feeling antsy lately and probably needed to go to a few more. Never the type to ask for help, he was unwilling to admit it, though. Instead, he decided to try a few meetings on the other side of the tracks. Whitehall. The seedy part of town. Fucking Ralph. "You're only as sick as your secrets," he said. Danny had made a list of all those he had harmed and went about making amends to them all. Some accepted his apologies, some didn't. All he could do was clean his own side of the street. There were a few amends that were impossible to make, but he had admitted all of his sins to either his sponsor, his therapist, or his priest. All but the one thing, that is. That's what Ralph kept harping on. Danny had stayed sober for 15 years. He deserved to keep the one thing to himself, didn't he? Fucking Ralph. Danny chose a group with the innocuous name of New Hope that met in the basement of St. Pete's Episcopal Church. While groups sometimes did actually meet in church basements, they were rarely as depicted on television or in the movies. That's just not the way things worked. Hollywood had gotten the coffee and donuts part down to a T, but missed the mark on most of the rest. Sadly, there weren't even any donuts at the New Hope group. Danny wished that he had known. He would have sprung for some. AA had given him his life back and brought a good bit of financial security with it, so he didn't mind giving back now and again. He made his way over to the coffee urn, making eye contact with a few people on the way. He didn't even bother to smile. The most he got were some grunts and shrugs as he walked by. He had already decided that he wouldn't ever be coming back to this group, so why bother? He wasn't about to walk out, though. Giving up was for losers. He grabbed a styrofoam cup from the top of the stack, which already had some black smudged fingerprints on the outside, and filled it with a sludge that they called coffee here at St. Pete's. Danny threw a buck into a basket on the table and plopped into a chair that seemed to be farthest away from everyone else. This was nothing like the usual meetings he hit. The church's basement room was about 40 by 40 feet square. There were 8 rectangular folding tables set up in a makeshift circle, with wooden chairs set along the outside. Unfortunately, there would be no speaker. This was a discussion meeting. They would most likely read something out of some bit of AA-approved literature, the big book 12 and 12, or some meditation book, and then go around the room weighing in on their own personal experience, strength, and hope. Danny didn't feel like talking, but the one bit of his sponsor's advice that he had latched onto early was to always say something, always be part of. Even though the ceiling held banks of fluorescent lights, the room still seemed cold. Perhaps it was the type of bulb they used. Were there different types? Or perhaps it was the way the light reflected off the sickly yellow linoleum floor and institution green walls. It smelled funny, too. Oh well, thought Danny. It's only for an hour. He had spent twice that amount of time scraping together, change for another bottle while fighting off the shakes in the past. In comparison, this would surely be more pleasurable than that. That's what it came down to, wasn't it? For him, to drink is to die. There were times that he had done the most disgraceful things in order to get drunk. Things that would have sickened him if he had been sober and not fiending for the next drink. So if sitting through a boring meeting in a crappy place meant not drinking, even for only an hour, then so be it. Not a difficult choice. He was not a snob, but the thought that the people here seemed to be a little lower class than what he was used to. He was by no means rich, but now that he had gotten his life together, he was back in the upper middle class demographic. The meetings that he attended were regularly frequented by businessmen, doctors, realtors, and other professionals. Frankly, even the blue-collar people at his normal meetings seemed to be upper class compared to these people. These people were, and he had to remind himself that he was being honest and not uncaring, the dregs of society. Unshaven, unkempt, tattooed, greasy, foul-smelling, AA had taught him not to judge. There, but for the grace of God go I. Still, it was hard. Just before the meeting was called to order, a man plopped down into the chair next to him. Oh, come on, buddy, thought Danny. 10 empty chairs, plenty to keep enough distance between all of us, and you have to sit right next to me. He sighed. At least this guy seemed friendly. Short, stout, PC for obese, with a red, round face, he introduced himself. Hi there, name's Mike. How about you? Danny, he said as he extended his hand. At least Mike was dressed. Well, button-down shirt, slacks, dress shoes, he was even wearing cologne, or was it the smell of booze? No, Danny decided it was cologne. The guy's breath smelled bad, though. Not smelled as in drinking smelled, but just reeked. His teeth seemed white enough, but it was as if he hadn't brushed in ages. Mike tried to make small talk. I haven't seen you before, so how long have you been coming to these meetings? About 16 years, replied Danny. I came in for a year and then decided that I wasn't ready to stop. I went back out for a while and have been sober ever since. 15 years, 1 month, 1 week, and 2 days. Wow. Mike seemed truly amazed. How many minutes? Danny just smiled. Me? Mike continued. Me? I've only been coming for about a month now. I'll have 30 days on Wednesday. Well, congratulations. For some people, those first 30 are the hardest. Real white-knuckle time. Mike was definitely pink clouding it. That's the term for AAs in early sobriety who think that life has suddenly become wonderful and carefree. After a good period of sobriety, it kicks in that drunk or not, life still has challenges. There's just no more alcohol to make the bad feelings go away. I'll be getting my chip. Mike was, of course, referring to the colored aluminum medallion that, although not universally used, has become almost synonymous with AA. Sobriety coins themselves do not help people stay sober as such. It's the meaning behind them that is important. When a person receives a coin for 1 month, 3 months, or a longer period of time, the coins give a sense of pride for staying sober as long as they have, and to motivate them to continue. If a person should feel the desire to drink again, they might finger the coin in their pocket to remind them of all the headway they have made up to that point. It makes them ask themselves if they truly want to throw away all that progress. Danny never liked the chips. He would occasionally step back and remember exactly how much sober time he had, remember that last drunk vividly, but he didn't want a constant reminder. He felt it would make it easier to ask the question, has it been long enough? Am I cured now? The conversation was surprisingly pleasant enough, but Danny was happy when the meeting began all the same. Same old, same old. Business first, then reading, then around the table sharing. When 8 o'clock rolled around, the chairperson indicated that it was time to close, and they joined hands for the Lord's Prayer. AA is not a religious organization, but saying the Lord's Prayer at the end is sort of a tradition in most, but not all groups. It's a sign of unity, if nothing else. Danny really didn't plan to stick around for fellowship afterwards, but he always stayed long enough to help clean up. However, before he got to the door, Mike cornered him. Hey, Danny, am I going to see you around here again? Danny creased his brow. Probably not. I live on the other side of town. I just stopped in here tonight because, well, it was just convenient. Danny guessed that had not technically been a lie. AAs had to be careful. Practice these principles in all of our affairs. Lies paved a slippery slope. Oh, Mike seemed dejected. It's just that they say to get phone numbers, you know, to call for when you feel like drinking, and I was wondering if I could get yours. Danny's shoulders relaxed, a little. Of course, Mike. That's never a problem. Never feel like you can't use it. Mike wouldn't use it. Most of the newbies never did. Danny pulled out a pen and jotted it down in the back of Mike's meeting pamphlet anyway. There you go. Thanks, Danny. Mike shook the pamphlet. I will definitely use this. You're a lifesaver. You guys are great. Mike bounced away. Danny made his way out into the parking lot and slid behind the wheel of his 2012 KIA. He said a little prayer for Mike. Hope he makes it. Who knew? Maybe being at that meeting was God's way of putting him in the right place at the right time. Danny rolled through the Burger King drive-thru on the way home to pick up an artery-clogging dinner. He just wanted to flick on the television, eat, shower, and get into bed. It had been an exhausting day. He had barely pulled into his garage when his cell phone began to jingle. Danny finished parking, unbuckled his seatbelt, and answered the phone right there in the front seat. It was an old habit, probably not a healthy one, but he just had to pick up the phone when it rang. He could not bear the thought of someone leaving a message. He had heard stories of AAs who were never able to get through to someone and things didn't turn out well. Once their faith in the system was broken, especially the newcomers, they didn't trust it anymore. Hello? Dano, it's Mike. Danny shifted the phone to his right ear. What's up, Mike? Oh, no. Don't worry. Dan. I'm not thinking of drinking, just wanted to test out the number. Practice call, you know? They say to get used to calling when you don't need to, and that way it'll be easier to call when you do need to, right? Yeah, Mike, that is a good idea. So what's up? Well, not a whole lot since I saw you. I just drove home. That's about it, Danny said with a smirk on his face. I'm about to have some dinner and then it's off to bed. Oh, okay, Mike replied. You go have your dinner and have a great night. Maybe I'll talk to you tomorrow. Sure, Mike, tomorrow. Danny showered, toweled off, and padded into his bedroom. He slid into a pair of silk boxers and fell into bed. He didn't imagine that he'd have any problem sleeping. He was physically exhausted. But as usual, his mind raced a mile a minute. He was never able to fall asleep without the radio turned on, even when about ready to pass out. His head would hit the pillow and the stinkin' thinkin' would kick in. That's how Danny discovered the wonders of talk radio. Dialed into a pundit recapping the day's news in a soothing voice, Danny pulled the chain on his bedside lamp and plunged the room into darkness. The pillow was cool. His stomach was full. His mind had calmed. Sleep began to. Danny's phone jingled. He propped himself up on one elbow, used the remote to turn the radio off, and grabbed the phone from the nightstand. Its screen had lit up with the number of the incoming call, but he didn't recognize it. It wasn't a name that had been programmed into his phone. Danny briefly considered putting the phone back down and letting it go to voicemail, but he knew that he would not be able to sleep until he heard the message and, more than likely, called whomever it was back. Danny sighed. Hello? Danny. Mike sounded grave this time. Sorry to call so late. I know you said that you were going to hit the hay and I didn't want to bother you, but it's okay. Mike, go ahead. Remember how I said that I'd be getting my chip in a couple of days? Yeah. I can't believe it'll have been a month already. You know, the day I took my last drink was a special day. Every day is special when it's your last day drunk, Mike. Yeah. But, special. It was the anniversary of, well, Mike began to get flustered. See, my wife and I, my ex-wife that is, and I lost our daughter that day. Danny swung his legs out from under the covers and sat up. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, don't be, Danny. It happened a long time ago. It would have been her 21st birthday. Mike trailed off. So long ago. The denial, the depression, the sadness, the anger. I started drinking afterward and just never thought to stop. Until now, that is. That's a long time to be stewing in it, Mike. Do you want to talk about it? Nah, Danny. No sense dredging up the past. Not when I'm doing so well. You're only as sick as your secrets, Mike. God, Danny hated it when his sponsor was right. Yeah. Maybe when I'm feeling a little more stable, Danny, maybe I'll talk about it then. I'm just not doing so well right now. Danny spoke with Mike for about half an hour, and when he was convinced that Mike was over the urge to drink, let him off the phone and promised to meet him the following day. He lay down his phone and swung back under the covers, a smile on his face. What was it they say? Even if Mike went out and drank that night, at least Danny stayed sober. Help yourself by helping others. Danny forgot to turn the radio back on, and that night, he dreamt about the one thing. Danny awoke to the sound of his phone. It wasn't the alarm tone, but the ringtone. Another phone call. He had come to recognize Mike's number by now. This was getting a little annoying, but sometimes that's the way it went. Mike would either fall off the wagon soon or he would start to make new contacts. In the meantime, Danny would just have to deal with it. Good morning, Mike. Dan. My man, good to hear your voice. Yeah, said Danny, scratching at the back of his head. It's been like 6 or 7 hours now, huh? Oh yeah. I'm not bothering you, am I? No. Yes, though, Danny. So how did last night go? Didn't drink, did you? Nope. And I owe it all to you, Dan. Well, Mike, you picked up the phone and made the call, so you can give yourself a little pat on the back. That phone can seem real heavy when it stands between you and a drink. Ain't that the truth? So, are you hitting a meeting this morning, Danny? No, Mike, I have a job. Danny tried not to sound ticked off. I have to work today. I promise that we'll get to 1 tonight. You pick it out and call me back around 6. Okay? Got it, Dano. 6. Talk to you then. Danny's worst fear came true. 3 more calls during the day. Mike had picked a group called As Bill Sees It on Danny's side of town. Danny decided that he would need to have a talk with Mike that evening. Calling when in need, or even for occasional friendly support was fine, but there was such a thing as abusing the system. You know, the boy who cried wolf sort of thing. Danny was about ready to throw his always answer the phone policy out the door. Danny didn't look forward to the conversation and had a rough time forcing his dinner down that evening. He wasn't hungry, but, as usual, he tried to keep his stomach full. Halt. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. 4 things an alcoholic never wanted to be. Any of those could be a setup for another drink. As he was finishing his second hot dog wrapped in white bread with ketchup, just as he liked them, his phone rang again. He checked the screen. Fucking Mike. Again. He decided that he wouldn't answer it, and let it go to voicemail. Seconds. Later it rang again. Didn't that guy get the message? Danny let it go to voicemail again. Another few minutes passed and it rang again. Danny wondered if Mike had changed his mind. Maybe he couldn't make it to the meeting after all. Still, he let it go to voicemail. Thankfully, more minutes passed and Mike did not call back. Danny felt like a heel, but he just couldn't deal with it anymore. At around 7:15, Danny tied his shoes and gathered his wallet and car keys. As he headed toward the door, his phone jingled. Mike. This time he answered. Hey, Mike. I'm headed out the door right now. Oh, thank God, Dan, exclaimed Mike. I couldn't get a hold of you and then I started to worry. I wondered if maybe you went out drinking again. Mike. Slow down, buddy. Danny was beginning to let his temper get the best of him. Would you? Oh, look, just wait for me at the meeting. Outside. We need to talk. Mike was breathing more regularly now. Oh, Danny, you really had me going there. Well, anyway, you can ride with me. What? Danny strode out of the back door and pressed the button to lift the garage door. As the door rolled up, it gradually revealed a battered green Honda sitting in the drive. Mike sat behind the wheel with the engine idling. Danny was taken aback. He walked briskly up to the driver's side door and motioned for Mike to lower the window. After a moment, and with a confused look on his face, Mike hit the button and the window glided down. What's wrong, Dan? Hop in. I thought that maybe we could ride to the meeting together. Then maybe grab a cup of coffee after, huh? Danny was fed up. No, Mike. No meeting. No coffee after. I don't have time for this. I don't know what to do with you. You cannot keep calling me. How the hell did you even find out where I live? Mike looked shamefacedly. I guess maybe I followed you home last night. What the hell? Sorry, Dan. I'm new at this. I really don't know how it works. Having had a spiritual awakening, as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Danny thought it over and softened. Okay, Mike, here's how it works, he said calmly. I'll come to the meeting, but I drive there myself. We talk a little. After the meeting, I come home. Alone. No coffee. No more calling. Unless you really need to. Like I am going to drink need to. Are we clear? Mike looked a little hurt, but replied, Okay, clear, Dano. Danny got into his KIA and followed Mike to the meeting. They sat next to each other, but Mike was uncharacteristically quiet. Afterward, they separated in the parking lot with nary a word. See you tomorrow, Danny? Maybe. Oh, hey, said Mike. There's a candlelight meeting called Night Owls tonight at the... Oh, right. Sorry. Tomorrow, Mike. Danny stressed. Danny thought that Mike may have gotten the message, but just in case. He turned his phone off for the evening for what was probably the first time in years. That night, Danny had a nightmare about the one thing. Danny pulled himself from bed and showered in the morning, and had almost forgotten his phone. Still wrapped in a towel and with damp hair, he walked over to the nightstand and turned it on. He returned to the bathroom as it went through its boot-up process, and then he heard a message tone from the next room. Wonder who that could be. 6 missed calls from Mike. 1, 2 voicemails, 4 texts. Thanks for coming, Dan. Sure you don't want to go to the meeting? Great meeting, should have been there. And need to talk. Danny didn't want any confrontation today. He turned his phone back off, dressed, and left home. He just knew that Mike would show up at his door after not receiving answers for long enough. He planned to not be there. Even though it was a Saturday, he would hang out at his office. There was a couch there. He could take a nap if need be. And he did need it after the previous night. He felt silly and demoralized. It was his own house, damn it. He was being chased away from his own home by, well, a stalker. Should he talk to the police? No, he decided. He would talk to his sponsor first, not daring to turn his cell back on for fear that it might ring in his hand. He picked up his desk phone and dialed in Ralph's number. Ralph was no help. At least he didn't tell Danny what he wanted to hear. Just suck it up, Danny. I've had my share of pigeons who either tried too hard or didn't try hard enough. My guess is that this Mike guy will turn out to be one or the other. Why don't you bring him along to tonight's meeting? I'll meet you guys at the acceptance group tonight. Maybe I can have a talk with him. Yeah, I suppose. Danny turned his cell back on in order to call Mike and invite him to the acceptance group that evening. 6 missed calls and it was barely noon. He sighed and began to scroll to Mike's number when the phone jingled. Danny didn't even need to look at the number to know who it was. Hi, Mike. Danny, I tried to... Yeah, I know, Mike. I've been at work. I just turned my phone on and saw that you had called. An icy thought ran down Danny's spine. Did Mike know where he worked too? Anyway, Mike, my sponsor suggested that I introduce you to him tonight. We're going to St. Andrews to a meeting called the Acceptance Group. Want to come? Are you kidding? Do you even need to ask? I would never pass on the chance to meet my sponsor's sponsor. He's like what? My grand sponsor? Whoa, Danny thought about it, and never had the talk of him being Mike's sponsor come up. A sponsor is a recovering alcoholic who has successfully made some personal progress in the AA recovery program. He or she is asked by another AA member to take on the individual responsibility of sponsorship. A sponsor shares their experiences on an individual and personal basis with another alcoholic who is trying to achieve or maintain their own sobriety through the AA program. They help the person focus and navigate through the stages of the program. The relationship between an AA member and his sponsor is usually a pretty close and intimate one, and not gone into lightly. Not only does an alcoholic need to carefully choose a sponsor, but also the potential sponsor must cautiously decide whether taking on a sponsee is prudent. Danny gave him the benefit of the doubt, though. Mike was new at this. Hey now, Mike. I'm just another alcoholic willing to help you out. I'm not really in the right state of mind to sponsor anyone. Not until he rid his conscience of the one thing anyway. Oh, okay. Don't feel bad, Mike. You're new. You catch on to how this works. Then Danny had a thought, one that might rid him of Mike for good. Ralph has really helped me out. Maybe he'd be a good choice for you to consider. He won't be the same as you, Dan. You'd be surprised. We're all the same in one way or another. Promise me that you'll keep an open mind. Okay. Anything for you, Dano. Danny hung up and texted directions to the meeting. Then he turned his phone back off. He decided on trying to catch a little nap after all, and so curled up on the couch in the reception area of his office. He drifted off almost immediately, but it didn't last long. He awoke screaming and in a cold sweat just 45 minutes later. He felt his face and realized that he'd been crying also. He dreamed of the one thing. Why had thoughts of it returned and in such force? Fucking Ralph. He brought it up and started pressing Danny. That would make sense. Although Danny had a feeling that Mike had something to do with it. Guilt over avoiding him? Constantly having to look over his shoulder and avoid phone calls? Or perhaps the fact that Mike had lost his daughter? Danny pushed the one thing to the back of his mind once again, and decided to cross the street to McDonald's to get in at least one meal before that evening's meeting. Danny had to cross a 4-lane street in order to reach McDonald's. It was the middle of the afternoon, clear weather, and being a Saturday, there was only light traffic. He absent-mindedly glanced both directions and crossed, not bothering to walk to the corner and wait for a signal. He was about halfway across when, seemingly out of nowhere, a car came racing at him. The driver was noticeably straddling the double-striped center line of the road, and overcorrected when he noticed Danny at the last moment. Danny could hear the tires screech as the driver got back into his own lane and sped off. A drunk knew the signs when he saw another drunk driving under the influence. This guy was definitely drunk, probably drinking in his car all morning and then falling asleep at the wheel after finally deciding to go home. Danny had done it himself. Even though he could have stayed home and drank contentedly and safely, in the comfort of his living room, he would choose to sit at the park on some mornings and drink in his car. He thought of how strange the ritual was, and how it was not unique to him. On any given morning, there would be a spattering of cars in each lot, all parked as far away from each other as the lot would allow. Each car with a single occupant, seemingly just sitting there. Every now and then he could glance over and catch the sight of a bottle being raised to the driver's lips. Fred, another guy from one of the meetings, would occasionally go down to a local park and work it. He'd walk around the lots and catch drunks, pretending that he had just been walking by and was looking to make conversation. Sometimes his presence was enough to make the drunk drive away. Sometimes they'd stay and talk. Sometimes they would even offer him a drink. Only twice, as far as Danny was aware of, did Fred actually get a drunk to open up about his problem and agree to take Fred's advice. It might not have seemed like a lot, but that may have been 2 lives saved, plus countless others, if you figured in the innocent lives that a drunk might take along with himself on the highway to hell. Danny began to hyperventilate. He ran the rest of the way across the street and sat on the curb, his gorge rising. He tried to calm himself but could not. Eventually, he vomited into the gutter. It wasn't the first time, but in the past, he'd always been drunk or hungover. He realized how pitiful he must have looked. He had never seemed to care, and the past eating was out of the question. Danny went back to the parking lot of his office, crossing the street with extra care this time, and got into his car. He drove straight to the church. He would be almost an hour and a half early, but that was okay. Someone was always there early to open up the rooms and make coffee. It was nice to show up and shoot the shit sometimes. Not surprisingly, Mike was already there when Danny arrived. He was sitting out in the parking lot but remained in his car. It looked like he was dozing. Danny walked over and rapped on the driver's side window a few times. Mike startled and he rolled the window down. "Danny, you're early. That's great." "Yep. Couldn't wait to get here, Mike," he said half-heartedly. "Tell you, what? Let's go around back and grab a bench." Danny led Mike behind the church. There was a small outdoor chapel of sorts. Just a few benches faces across and overlooking a small stream. Danny motioned for Mike to take a seat and then sat down next to him. "Mike, let's talk." Danny seemed surprisingly calm. "I know that you're pretty new to the program, and this may be skipping ahead quite a bit, but let me explain how the 4th and 5th steps of AA go. They are, to me at least, probably the most important steps of all 12. They are where you begin healing." "Sounds great, Dan." "Not really. I did a really shitty job on my 5th step. Remember how I told you that you're only as sick as your secrets?" Mike nodded. "Yeah, Danny. The 4th and 5th steps ask you to make a searching and fearless moral inventory, and then admit to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. I can see where that would help. I have so much guilt and remorse, Danny. Sometimes I think it's what makes me drink." Danny shook his head. "No, Mike, you drink because you're an alcoholic. But it's a whole lot easier to get sober when you get your head on straight, when you get rid of all of the shit that's deep down inside, the stuff that regrets are made of. So are we going to do that now?" "Not we. Me. I thought that you already did your steps." Danny nodded. "I did, Mike. I did. But the 4th and 5th steps are carried on throughout the rest. We have to continue to take a moral inventory and do those steps over and over because we are human. Just because we get sober doesn't make us saints. We still make mistakes." Mike nodded slowly and remained quiet. It was as if he knew that. Danny was about to say something important and it was time to keep his mouth shut. "You see, Mike, there was something that I never admitted in my 5th step. Something that I couldn't admit. The one thing that I wasn't ready to give up. I don't know why, but it's catching up to me now. I'm afraid that if I don't let it go, I'm either going to drink or kill myself. Or both." "What is it, Dano?" "This is probably a mistake. Telling a newcomer, especially about the one thing. In fact, this would be better left with a priest, but at this point it doesn't matter because I'm going to have to own up to it. The one thing is something that everyone will find out about eventually. Probably sooner now. You can tell me, Danny. Your secret is safe with me." Suddenly it was as if Mike had become the old-timer. His demeanor changed. He surely didn't seem like a newbie anymore. The whole way he was acting. He had gone from being an annoying, overexcited asshole to a quiet, comforting soul, at least in Danny's heart. Danny took a deep breath. I've been sober for 15 years, 1 month, 1 week, and 4 days. I told you that I came into the rooms about 16 years ago, though. Well, something happened about 6 months into that. I'd been dry, sure, but still an alcoholic. Still exhibiting all of the same behavior. That's what the program is for, by the way. Not to make us stop drinking, but to make us saner, healthier people. Well, Mike, Danny's breath hitched in his throat. He was already regretting bringing this up, but he felt like it was too late now. Go on, Dano, I'm listening. It was late summer, around 7 o'clock dusk. I was driving up Parkside Avenue, you know the place? Yeah. As a matter of fact, I used to live in a cul-de-sac off Parkside. Then you know the hill about midways. Anyway, I was coming up over the crest of the hill, tooling along, pink clouding it, stone cold sober, mind you. A little girl, damn it. She came out from between 2 parked cars and just ran right out in front of me. Oh God, Danny. No. Yes. I couldn't stop. I fucking ran her down, Mike. A little girl. That's horrible. But it was an accident, Danny. You said so yourself. You were sober. She ran out from between the cars. You couldn't have known. No, but it was what I did next that was unforgivable. What, Dan? Mike rocked back, laced his fingers together, and knitted his brow. He had a clear-headed look about him, one that Danny had never seen on Mike's face before. What was unforgivable? Danny took a deep breath. I didn't stop. I just kept on driving. I panicked. It was like I had been drinking. I didn't want to get caught. Afterward, I realized that it was an accident, but at the time, I just panicked. I acted just like a drunk would have. I left her there, Mike. Maybe she was still alive, but I left her there. What if she was just hurt and could have been saved if I had just stopped? She wasn't hurt. She was dead the instant you hit her, Dan. You couldn't know that. I didn't know that, and I was there. I know, Danny. That's what the EMT said. Dead on impact. Danny jerked his head up. It was as if his stomach had dropped out from under him, like the first hill on a roller coaster. What did you say? When I got there, that's what the EMT told me. Dead on impact. She didn't suffer. She probably had no idea what had happened. What the hell are you talking about, Mike? She was my daughter, Danny. Danny was speechless. He sat still for a moment, and then started shaking his head, violently. No. Fuck you, Mike. Her father is dead. I followed the story in the papers. He killed himself 2 months after the accident. Got drunk and drove into a bridge abutment. Why the hell would you even say something like that? Mike had tears welling up in the corners of his eyes. Because now I know, Danny. Now I know that you are repentant. Fuck you, Mike. How can you pull this shit on me? How can you even say something like that? Do you think that this is a joke? Well, fuck you. Danny stormed away, sobbing, and walked toward the church. Ralph had arrived and was walking in himself. He noticed how upset Danny was and stopped him, grabbing his shoulders and turning his arm around somewhat forcefully. Danny, what's wrong? What's going on? That asshole, I told him, Ralph, I told him the one thing, and do you know what he said? Slow down, Danny, said Ralph. If you're ready, why don't you tell me what the one thing is first? His secret no longer a secret. He told Ralph exactly what he had told Mike. And he said that he's her father, and he forgives me. That dick. Who, Danny? Who? Mike. That idiot who's been harassing me. Where is he, Danny? Is he here? I'll talk to him. Danny turned and pointed at the bench. He's right. He was sitting with me, right there. Ralph cocked his head. Danny, are you okay? No, I'm upset, and with good reason. I just told him the one thing, and he goes and says that? Ralph's brow wrinkled with concern. Danny, I've been here for 10 minutes, waiting for you to go inside. I saw you sitting there on the bench talking to yourself and thought that you needed some alone time. You were alone the whole time, Danny. Danny scanned the parking lot. No battered green Honda. He started to breathe heavily and pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his call log, all of the calls he had made and received, all of the texts. Nothing. The only call in the last 3 days was the one he had made to Ralph that same morning. There was one text message waiting in his inbox. It had no number associated with it. I forgive you, Danny. Story 3 night. In a tree stand. I am not a person who is scared easily. I don't let fear control me. I have had bullets whiz by my head. I have had rocket-propelled grenades explode less than 10 yards from me. I know what it is like to jump from an airplane under gunfire. I know what it's like to live as if this was my last day on Earth, yet I was never afraid. I can only remember one time in my life where I could not control fear. One time where I truly felt uncontrollable fear. The fear that makes you cry and tremble. The fear that makes you lose control. No one but my best friend ever believed what I had experienced was true. My family didn't believe me. My now wife didn't believe me. I don't know if you would even believe me. I don't care. I'm past the point of not telling my story, for fear that I won't be believed. Please understand that I grew up in the middle of nowhere. The closest people to me were my grandparents who lived just down the road from us, and my best friend John's family who lived right next door. There were several other homes in the area within walking distance, but far enough apart that you really couldn't call them next-door neighbors. I learned to hunt, fish, shoot, and survived in the woods at an early age. My father had grown up in the country, moved to attend college, and met my mother. My mother was the opposite of my father. She grew up in the city. She taught me art, science, and how to cook. I had the best of both worlds growing up. I played multiple sports in high school, but decided to join the Army Reserve after I graduated. I graduated with honors from basic training and AIT, and enrolled in a local college afterwards with plans to study computer engineering. At college, I entered ROTC. I graduated from college and completed BOLC, Basic Officer Leaders Course, for the Army. I returned home only to be deployed to Iraq, where I served for a year. As a second lieutenant in Iraq, I was in charge of a platoon of soldiers. We were good at what we did, and command took notice, putting us on missions and patrols that were most likely to see action. I loved it, but after a year, the adrenaline had worn off, and the being shot at and seeing things explode feet from you began to fatigue my men and me. In the end, because we were good at what we did, we all went home, bruised, battered, and tired, but alive to our loved ones. I had managed to keep up on my computer engineering skills while in Iraq and had landed a job with a company 2 hours from where I grew up. I came home in August, and the job wasn't going to start till mid-January of the following year, so I had some time to relax and unwind. I was still living with my parents until the job started, and fall meant one thing: hunting season. Specifically bow season, which was something I missed the last 2 years because of my training and deployment. I eagerly unpacked my hunting clothes and gear from the attic where my mother had stored them and woke up early one day, September morning, to head into the woods to scout for a hunting spot for that upcoming season. As I walked out the front door with my backpack full of gear on, I noticed John and his father standing in their backyard around the pen in which they kept chickens. John was bigger than me. He wasn't college educated, but he was good with his hands and worked in construction. He was living with his parents while he was building his own house in his free time, on some land he bought a few miles away. "Morning," I said, as I lumbered with my gear to where they were standing. "What's up, brother?" John replied, with a half smile. "Just heading out to do some scouting for bow season." I could see the pen door was open, and they were both looking at it inquisitively. John's dad was slowing, moving it back and forth and playing with the latch as if to test the door itself. "I don't know," John's dad said, puzzled. "The latch is too high for a raccoon unless they climbed the wire fence and opened it." "I've seen them do some crafty things, and they are smart," replied John to his dad before turning to me. "It's the second time in 2 weeks someone or something has gotten into the coop. Took a chicken last week and 2 last night. It might the damn town kids who ride their ATVs on the paths back in the woods all the time, or it might be raccoons. Either way, we're going to have to lock the pen with a padlock now. Town kids must be getting bored if they're stealing chickens," I stated with a sarcastic smirk. The local kids from the nearest town always played pranks or committed some minor act of vandalism or theft. Usually the result was broken mailboxes, or some type of penis-shaped graffiti on a house or garage door. Nothing was so serious that it couldn't be fixed or cleaned up. Before I left to head into the woods, John had told me to scout out Crow Hill. He mentioned there had been a lot of deer activity up in that area, and that he would have put his tree stand there except he got an offer from his girlfriend's dad to hunt their family farm. Crow Hill was a densely wooded hill about 3/4 of a mile from our houses. One half of the hill was covered in a thick pine forest where murders of crows would occasionally hang out in noisy groups. The pines abruptly came to an end and opened up into a hardwood forest with fairly thick underbrush on the other half of the hill. The leaves had just started to fall and the smell of the woods and crisp air excited me. The dust and sand of Iraq paled in comparison to the crunch of leaves under my boots and cool air of my home. I had already seen several deer and deer signs by the time I reached the top of Crow Hill. As I came over the crest of the hill, a loud snort like a blast of air rang out. My senses heightened as I quickly scanned the area. Over the top of the underbrush I saw it. There it goes. There it goes. I thought to myself excitedly as I watched 2 pair of very large deer antlers glide over the top of the underbrush and disappear into the pine forest. I walked to the border of the pine forest where the deer had run. It was a meeting of 2 worlds. The hardwood forest had leaves, but the sunshine was bright and lit up the forest floor, while the pine forest's trees blocked out almost all light, leaving the forest floor dark and mysterious. It was a little creepy to me, but I didn't care. There were deer tracks, antler rubs, droppings, and deer beds on the ground all around me. This was the spot. I turned in circles as I scanned for the perfect tree to attach my ladder stand to. Something to my left caught my eye as I spun. 10 yards away was a section of ground that looked like it had been purposely cleared of leaves in a circular fashion. Something was lying in the middle of the circle. With curiosity piqued, I walked over. What the hell? I was thinking out loud, as my eyes tried to recognize what I was looking at. It was a house cat's body, but it had been dismembered. The limbs were strewn around in no organized fashion, and it was missing its head. Only skin and bones were left. The cat had been there a while by the looks of it, but what confused me more than the position and condition of the cat were the odd markings around the body. Lines and circles surrounded the cat in an odd fashion. Damn kids, I thought to myself. The town kids had probably come across a cat that was probably killed by a coyote or bobcat, and decided to make its corpse look spooky by drawing weird, incoherent symbols in the dirt around its body. The empty beer bottle just outside the circle confirmed my theory. As much as the sight bothered me, the thought of deer hunting pushed any concern for the dead cat out of my mind. I brushed off the find and began looking for a tree again. I picked a large tree that was centered perfectly between the pine forest and the hill's edge I had just walked up. There was a bit of a clearing that ran from the tree to the hill's edge. I pulled my large Bowie knife out of my backpack and began to clean out the clearing and around the base of the tree. I cut away as many small shrubs and branches as I could to make a clear path for me to walk. As I was almost finished, the flapping of the wings and the familiar squawking of a murder of crows flying overhead into the pine forest could be heard. Something had kicked them up. The hum and hiss of an ATV engine soon followed. It grew louder and passed. That's probably what scared them. I'm probably close to one of the paths that run behind the house. I made my way through the underbrush, in the direction of where I heard the ATV. Only 20 yards from the tree I chose, I ran into a dirt ATV path. I cleared out a walkway from the tree to the path, marked it and my chosen tree with a ribbon, and followed the path back until I began to recognize the woods behind my house. It was the perfect setup. There was an easy path to follow, and I wouldn't have to worry about scaring any deer on my way to and from the tree stand. The next day, John and I took his four-wheeler up to the tree I had marked off, and we set up my ladder stand. I had since forgotten about the cat I had found the previous day. The seat and platform were about 25 feet off the ground, which was the perfect height. I could see everything from the ATV path behind me to the edge of the hill in front of me. I felt good about this spot, and I was ready to start hunting the beginning of bow season in the coming weeks. when bow season finally arrived a few weeks after I had everything set up, and I spent my days and evenings in the woods. I saw plenty of deer and even a few bucks that I considered shooters. I was holding out for those 2 bucks I had seen when I crossed over the hill that first day when scouting, though. One of those 2 monsters is what I was after. I always took my cell phone with me. It was kept on silent in case of an emergency. Strangely enough, because we lived near radio towers, I got good reception from my tree stand and would take pictures of the beautiful scenery around me, or send texts to John mocking him about the size of the deer I was going to shoot, compared to anything he was going to get on his girlfriend's farm. Angry birds also helped to pass the time when all the animals in the forest wanted to be still. The day, or night rather, that I felt real fear for the first time ever was on October 23rd. It was a cool day and overcast. It was perfect for hunting. I had some errands to run in the morning and had promised to help my father with some housework in the afternoon, which left only the evening for hunting. I was fine with that. It meant I got to hunt the twilight hour, or as hunters know it, the magic hour. It's that last hour before sunset where everything seems to get brighter before it becomes pitch black and all the animals are on the move. Was on my way back from running my errands when I pulled into the driveway and saw my father talking to one of our neighbors from down the road, Mr. Dawson. "How are you, Mr. Dawson?" I asked as I stepped out of my car. "Oh, just fine. You're looking good and healthy, and I'm glad to see you home from that hellhole across the pond," he said with a smile. His black lab was with him, obviously out for an evening walk. "Jake was talking about someone taking his rabbits out of their pen," my dad started, and I mentioned that John's family recently had some chickens taken. Dawson chimed in immediately. "I know it was them damn kids because my lab went nuts last night barking up a storm." I threw on the floodlight, and the rabbit pen was wide open. I opened my back door and could hear those shits running up through the woods. "What the hell is wrong with kids in the town these days?" I stated with disapproval. "I guess you'll have to padlock you pens in cages like John and his dad did." "Well, that's the thing," Mr. Dawson started. "The rabbit pen is chained and locked. Whoever did this broke it clean off, probably with a bolt cutter. Now I have to run into the hardware store and get a new chain and lock." That evening, with my backpack strapped to my back and my bow and arrows in hand, I headed out into the cool, crisp woods. As I was stepping into the woods, I could hear John's familiar voice call out to me. "Hey," he shouted in a proud tone from his back porch. "Got my deer this morning. When you get back from dicking around in the woods, you want to come over and have a beer?" "Yeah, I'll be over. Right after I bag that monster that's up by my tree stand," I taunted back. It was a good 25-30 minute walk to my tree stand. I was tired when I got to the stand, but my adrenaline kept me going. Like a ninja, I made my way through the brush to the tree, ascended the ladder, and pulled my backpack and bow up after me with a rope without making a sound. With my butt planted in the seat of my stand and my bow on its hook, I felt completely at peace. Beautiful nature surrounded me even on this overcast day. It was unimaginably better than the war-torn streets of Iraq. I pulled my phone from my backpack to check the time. 5:03 p.m. Perfect timing. The magic hour was going to start early because of the overcast day, and excitement was flowing through my veins. Everything was perfect. The wind was in my face, so deer coming over the hill or out of the pine forest wouldn't be able to smell me. Smaller animals were scampering across the ground, headed to their burrows or nests for the night, and the faint hooting of an owl that had just awoken could be heard in the distance. 5:55 p.m. I put my phone away and let my eyes adjust to the dimming light. My adrenaline had kicked in harder as the thought of one of those 2 large bucks coming into shooting range raced through my mind like wildfire. I knew I would be walking home in the dark, so I brought a flashlight to guide my way. I double-checked to make sure I had packed it when I heard the crunching of leaves. My eyes opened wide and my ears perked up as I tried to quickly find the direction of the sound source. It wasn't a small animal. It was the distinct rhythmic sound of something heavier walking among the leaves. There it is. The noise is coming from over the hill's edge. I slowly pulled a pair of small binoculars from my backpack to see if I could get a better glimpse of what was coming over the hill. I can see it. It's a deer. My mind was racing. I couldn't tell if it was a buck or a doe, but I could definitely see the grayish-brown coloring of the fur of the distorted figure through the brush's branches. 10 more yards and I would have a clear view and a long shot at whatever it was. I strung the binoculars around my neck and got ready to stand up. It stopped, as if it didn't want to come into the clearing at the edge of the hill. The light was dimming fast and I was afraid I would not get a shot at a trophy buck if that is what it was. The deer moved left into the brush. My heart sank to my feet. I began to relax and accept the fact that it wasn't going to come close, enough for me to get a shot until I realized it was moving closer. But through he brush on the left side of the clearing. I stood up and put my left hand on my bow. I only had about 20 minutes of light left and I wanted to make sure I made a clean shot. I could hear the deer 30 yards in front of me in the brush on the left side of the clearing. It was definitely in range of a clean shot. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was going to step out in the clearing. My heart was pounding. I could feel my body begin to sweat in excited anticipation. The excitement racing through my body stopped my senses from realizing the forest had fallen silent. I began to remove my bow from the hook when the deer began to move out into the clearing. What the fuck is that? From behind the bush appeared an arm, long, black, leathery, and with less than 5 fingers. It stretched out and planted its palm on the ground. A shock went up my spine. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. My body began to shake. My left hand fell to my side and my legs gave out underneath the weight of my body, causing me to silently thump back into my seat. I grabbed my binoculars and slowly lifted them back up to my face. I didn't want to make any jerk movements. I didn't want whatever it was to know where I was. Was this a person? I watched through my binoculars as the rest of the body of this thing emerged from behind the bushes. Its skin was leathery and its legs were very long. It looked human-like, but it wasn't human. It moved in a crouching fashion. I could see something in its left hand. It was holding something brown. The light was fading, and I struggled to make my eyes adjust. It was a rabbit, not a wild rabbit. One like Mr. Dawson, kept and raised. I could feel fear gripping me no matter how hard I fought it. I trained to fight and to hunt. I didn't know what this thing was or how I would be able to confront it. I sure as hell couldn't leave my tree stand now. That's when I smelled it. I had smelled it once before in Iraq. Burning flesh. The smell nauseated me. The air reeked with this creature's presence. My binoculars were fixated to my face. What is it doing? The creature meticulously cleared out the leaves around its feet in a circle. I watched in horror as it raised the rabbit above its head. Its eyes were yellow with no clear center or pupil. Its mouth contorted into a half smile, bearing a mouth full of deformed teeth. Its lower jaw unhinged and sank loosely below as it placed the rabbit's head in its mouth. Faster than a mousetrap, its bottom jaw shut and it jerked its head violently backwards, ripping the rabbit's head from its body. The snapping of bone sent a shiver up my spine. It grabbed the rabbit's back legs and held the lifeless body, upside down. I watched in horror as blood flowed from the animal's corpse and splashed on the cleared ground. It shook the body up and down as if trying to empty it of every last bit of blood. Like a smoker with bad lungs, it seemed to giggle in a wheezing, airy fashion. My eyes welled with water. I couldn't fight it anymore. I was gripped with fear. I was crying. The military officer who had been shot at, almost blown up, jumped. Out of airplanes was crying. It was almost dark and I could just make out what this thing was doing. I slowly put the binoculars down and concentrated on not breathing hard or crying out loud in fear. Snap, snap, snap. I looked back at the creature. Each snap threw another shock of fear up my spine. It was dismembering the rabbit. Snap. The cracking of the bones made my body shiver. I watched as it purposefully placed each of the rabbit's body parts within the circle and drew random forms in the dirt around the dead body with its long, bony fingers. It lifted its hand and extended one of its fingers. I bit my lip almost to the point of bleeding to keep from making any sound as it scooped the entrails from the rabbit's chest cavity and placed them in its mouth. As the last bit of light left the sky, I realized I would be stuck in the tree stand unless this thing left. I should text John to come get me. No. What if it sees the glow from my phone's screen? What if he gets here and it kills him? My mind was racing faster than ever. I didn't once notice the wind change. To my horror, in the last bit of light, the creature suddenly stopped what it was doing and became still. Tears were rolling down my cheek. My hair was on end. My hands were shaking and I could feel my body sweat. I didn't want to move. Suddenly, like a dog, it raised its head and began jerking it up and down. Shit. The wind has changed. It can smell me. It sniffed the air in 3 different directions with mighty snorts. All of a sudden it dropped low to the ground as if it were about to pounce. The wind was at my back. It knew I was there. Maybe not my exact location, but this thing knew I was there. The light completely faded as I watched it sneak back into the brush on the left side of the clearing. My heart pounded hard enough to cause a sharp pain in my chest. I wanted to cry aloud. I wanted to get my phone and call my friend, my parents, anyone who might be able to save me. There was no noise. The air was like a vacuum around me. I sat shaking in my stand. Crunch. 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 Shit. It's coming toward me from the left. My ladder is on the left. God, what if it finds the ladder? I need to cut it down. The crunching was getting louder. The creature was close enough I could hear its incoherent rambling. It sounded like an old man struggling to breath, fighting for his last breath. I reached into my backpack as fast and as quiet as I could and pulled out my knife. I stood up and turned to face the tree. It was dark. I couldn't see anything. I felt the bark of the tree above me, desperately trying to find the cord that was holding the ladder to the tree. Ting. It's on the ladder. It's coming up the fucking ladder. Where is the cord? God, please. Here. I pulled hard. The knife cut through the cord with a snap of breaking bones. I pushed the ladder away from the tree. I could feel its weight on the ladder. With a boom that echoed throughout the forest, the ladder crashed to the ground with the weight of the creature. It let out a scream that pierced my ears and echoed everywhere. I covered my ears to shield myself from the horrific sound. I had never heard anything so horrible. The squeal of 100 pigs mixed with a low roar pierced the night sky. I couldn't see it. I knew I pissed it off. I heard it scramble to its feet. I grabbed the tree to keep my balance. It's shaking the tree. It's trying to climb the tree. I could hear its fingers grasp the bark, sinking its nails into the tree's flesh. There was only 20 left between this thing and me. I grabbed my bow, pulled back, aimed straight down, and released one of my arrows directly below my stand. The arrow smacked the ground, and the creature let out a scream louder than the previous. Pig screams. Thousands of pigs screaming pierced the air. At this point, I couldn't hold back my fear. My breathing was audible, and I was pouting like a small child. My pounding heart was about to break my sternum. My eyes were full of tears. It didn't matter. I couldn't see through the darkness anyway. I somehow fumbled another arrow from my quiver onto my bow. God save me, please. Fuck off, I shouted and released the arrow in the same exact spot as the previous. Again, the arrow smacked into the ground, followed by a bellowing squeal. The tree stopped shaking. I could hear it on the ground. Its fingers digging into the leaves and dirt as it tore up the ground beneath it. The tearing came from beneath me. I struggled to put another arrow on my bowstring. The noise began to surround me as I fumbled along. It was to my right, now to my left, now below me, now behind me. The tearing was everywhere. No. Are there more of these things? I'm going to die. Did it call others? I pulled back my bow with my third arrow. The noise was everywhere. It sounded to my left. I guessed and shot in the dark. The ear-shattering noise and screams continued. I had one arrow left. I struggled to prep my last arrow. The noise surrounded me as if thousands of these things had encircled me. The squealing had intensified to the point where my ears were ringing. I drew back my bow and fired the last of my arrows directly beneath my stand. The squealing roar became unbearable, as if I had hit it. I was out of arrows. I dropped my bow and slumped back in my seat. The noise was so intense I didn't even hear the bow hit the ground. I picked up my knife and held it tight to my chest. I could feel my body crashing from the immense adrenaline. Rush. Silence. I didn't notice the silence. My ears stopped ringing. Was it gone? The woods were still. All I could hear was the beating of my heart as it slowly came down from its frantic pace. The woods were silent and motionless. Whatever it was disappeared or was standing perfectly still. I could feel the last of my tears roll down my cheek. I couldn't smell it anymore. I couldn't smell anything. My nose was stuffed from my crying. I was still shaking and my body was exhausted. I should text or call someone to get me. No. If I pull out my phone, the screen light will give me away if that thing is still here. I had no idea what time it was. Absolute darkness engulfed me. The only thing that kept me from falling asleep from exhaustion was the thought of that thing being out there somewhere, watching me in the dark. Minutes passed. Hours passed. I was so tired, but I dare not fall asleep. A crunch of leaves every now and then caused me to grip my knife tightly. The woods remained silent otherwise. No creatures moving about, no owls hooting, no bats screeching among the treetops. Light. The first light peering over the horizon broke an eternity of darkness. I was able to start making out shapes and images. I looked down and saw my bow lying on the ground next to the ladder. The hair on my neck stood up again. My heart began to pound. My breathing became quick. All around the bottom of the tree I was in were symbols drawn in the dirt. The leaves were cleared for 10 feet in a circle around the tree. All these weird symbols were drawn in the dirt where the leaves once laid. It was now or never. I grabbed my phone and texted John. He was the only one close enough that had a four-wheeler. It was day and I didn't see the creature, but there was no way I was going to stay in the woods another second, and I wasn't going to get down in case it was. Lying in wait under the brush, me, John. I'm still at my tree stand. I need help. I waited. It was 7 a.m. Please, God, let him be up. John, dude, it's 7 a.m. What the fuck you still doing in your tree stand? He's up. Tears of joy began to well in my eyes as I fumbled quickly to reply. Me, come get me, please hurry. John, okay, I'm OMW. I put my phone down. I was exhausted. I hadn't slept all night. The familiar rumble of John's ATV began to fill the air a few minutes later. What adrenaline I had left coursed through my veins. When John was close enough I could see him coming from the stand, I grabbed my backpack and jumped. 20 feet straight. Down I descended. I hit the ground hard with a very audible thump. My left leg gave out from beneath me and I could feel the pain stream through my body as my ankle twisted. I spent no time lying on the ground. I fought through the pain, picked myself up, grabbed my bow, and hobbled as fast as I could towards the ATV trail. The fear from the night before returned as I was running towards the trail. Now was the time I was most vulnerable. Now was the time the creature would strike. It was the perfect opportunity. The smell returned. The scent of burning flesh filled the air. John pulled up to the clear cut that led to my stand as I reached the ATV trail and jumped quickly on the back of his four-wheeler. "Did you just jump from the stand?" he said with a shocked voice. "And what smells like hell up here? Fucking drive, now, okay. John spun the four-wheeler around and headed off towards our house. The feeling of fear wouldn't leave me. I slumped forward onto John's back out of exhaustion. I didn't have the strength to hold myself up. I only had enough strength to hang onto his jacket to keep from falling off. The motor of the four-wheeler covered my sobs of relief. "Are you okay?" John asked loudly as he navigated the trail. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was too exhausted from the fear that had gripped me the entire night prior. The motor cut off and I looked up. We were outside my house. I hadn't stopped sobbing. I rolled off the back of the four-wheeler and laid in my yard sobbing. It's all I could do. Everything went black. I sat up rapidly and scanned my surroundings in a panic. My mother and father were there along with John, telling me to calm down. The familiar softness of our couch on my body and smell of my mother's cooking filled the air. I was home. My ankle was wrapped with a bag of ice resting upon it. They gave me water to drink and questioned me about what had happened that night. I told them everything. As my story ended, I could see the disbelief in their eyes. My parents apologized to me for not checking up on where I was. They thought I had come home and gone out with friends or over to John's for a drink. John apologized the same and said he assumed I had come home tired and went to sleep. They tired to rationalize what I saw. They said it must have been an emaciated bear with mange. I knew better. I knew what I saw, what I went through. I didn't hunt the rest of the season and refused to enter the woods. John, a few days later, had kindly gone to my stand to retrieve it for me without prompt. He brought it over to my garage and met me with a puzzled look in his eye. "So I found your stand," he started with an unbelieving tone in his voice. "And it was on the ground. It's been beat up and the safety cables are busted off like someone had ripped it from the tree. Found your ladder too." He pointed to the white marks on bottom rungs of the ladder. "Those look like claw marks to me. Found 3 of your arrows. You hit something because they are covered in some type of blood. Don't know what kind, but it smells like hell." He handed me my arrows covered in a reddish-black gooey crust. "Also, the tree your stand was in. Bottom half of it has been stripped of bark and is smeared in what looks and smells like animal blood. All of those markings in the ground you talked about. Yay, those are there too." He slumped down on the edge of his four-wheeler, as if in complete disbelief. "I believe you. We didn't talk about it for a long time. We felt as if it were best to forget, never revisit or pursue. I eventually moved out of my parents' house to an apartment when my job started. The following summer, John called me with some interesting news. The missing animals continued infrequently throughout the spring. Mr. Dawson had become overly frustrated with whoever was stealing his rabbits. He set up a security cam to watch the pen and had purchased an industrial chain and lock to keep them out. One night his lab went nuts barking at something outside in the direction of the rabbit pen. Figuring he had them on camera, and to teach them a lesson, he let his lab out to possibly scare them away. The dog ran out the open door and in the darkness seemed to be struggling with something. When Mr. Dawson turned on the floodlight, the chains on the rabbit pen were busted off and his dog was gone. Someone also destroyed his camera before it could capture the perpetrator on video. While I felt for Mr. Dawson, the strange part of our phone conversation had yet to come. The construction company John had worked for had secured a contract to build a new housing development on the side of Crow Hill, namely the side with the pines on it, as it was closest to the nearest road. It was to be an upper-middle-class housing development. John was part of the clearing crew who would go up and clear out the trees and underbrush of the designated area where the housing development would be built. John mentioned that he was clearing a small bottom where they were going, to build a retention pond for irrigation when they came across something disturbing. The bottom was nestled at the base of Crow Hill and a neighboring hill. It was devoid of large trees but rampant with small shrubs and heavy underbrush. As he and his crew cleared the bottom, they found what appeared to be pathways of bent grass and branches. They didn't look natural and were littered in small animal bones. As they cleared more and more, they came across what looked like a nest in the middle of the thicket. The grass and branches were bent over top of a bed of long grass like a makeshift dome. The outer part of the nest was void of grass and contained strange markings in the dirt. In the middle on the supposed bed of grass, they found several strange items like broken locks, broken chains, blood-covered shreds of clothing, and a dog collar strapped through the top of what looked like a canine skull. John told me the tags had Mr. Dawson's name and address on them. He had returned them to Mr. Dawson but didn't have the heart to tell him where he found them or in what condition. I could hear the slight trembling in John's throat. I knew he now believed me for sure. I went home several months later to see my parents. Our neighbors' animals had stopped disappearing. The housing development was about halfway finished. I was watching the news late that first night home. One of the headlines was, "Police on lookout for animal kidnapper." Apparently, several family pets had disappeared over the last few months in the next county over. Story. For the quiet game, have you ever wondered why we see ghosts? Maybe they have a message for us. Perhaps they're trapped somewhere between our world and theirs, oblivious to the fact that time has gone on without them. There have been tales of long-lost family members visiting us in our dreams and unexplainable coincidences that put a smile on your face. But for every heartwarming story of visits from the other side, there is a frightening account of an unwelcome presence that can send a chill down your spine. I could share a number of instances where I felt uneasy or even frightened by what I knew was an angry or negative spirit. However, the story I'm about to share is one that has cast a dark cloud over my nightmares for over 17 years. I can just short of guarantee that this story will force even the non-believers to check that dark corner. Before drifting off to dreamland, I was 11 years old the first time I saw her. My parents were away for the evening and I had ordered Scream on pay-per-view. I haven't watched a PPV movie in a long time, but back then it would play the movie on a 24-hour loop once ordered. Well into the second viewing, I got up from the couch to grab a drink from the kitchen. I was headed for the stairs when I saw a shadow out of the corner of my eye. Hesitating for a moment, I took a deep breath and continued toward the stairway. Returning to the basement, the air seemed ominous. The room seemed darker. As I relaxed on my seat to watch the rest of my movie before bed, I saw what appeared as a strange silhouette standing near the bathroom door. I focused my full sight on what I thought was there. I blinked and it was gone. Boy, was this movie giving me the creeps. Then I heard it. The soft whisper of a young girl at first, followed by a much louder command. "Let's play." Now, I have two older brothers, so I flipped on the light expecting to see them playing a trick on me with a flashlight and a tape recorder or something. These are the same brothers who used to hide a toy record player in my room blaring Train sounds and throw me in with the lights off, holding the doorknob so I couldn't get out. Needless to say, teasing me during a horror movie would not have been above them. With the lights now on, I yelled, "Ben, Phil, stop it or I'm telling Mom!" Silence. I figured I was just overtired. I curled up on the couch and felt my eyelids getting heavier as I finished watching my movie. Just before I drifted off, I heard Ben's bedroom door creak. I dismissed it, too tired to get myself worked up over nothing. I then got the sense something was watching me. I tried to shake it off, I just wanted to sleep. Finally, I heard something breathing heavily and slowly. At first, I thought it was me and that I was psyching myself out, so I held my breath for a moment. Nothing. Swearing off slasher movies forever. I turned to face the back of the couch, hoping that would help me get to sleep. "Can you play now?" The question came from lips that couldn't have been further than a few feet from the couch. Still turned, I yelled, "I'm gonna tell Mom if you guys don't leave me alone." Within seconds, Ben and Phil were at the landing by the back door. "What the hell are you screeching about?" Ben asked. He and Phil not the least bit concerned about the panic on my face. "If you guys don't stop, I'm telling Mom when she gets home." As I spoke, I knew there was no way they could have been both places at once. The realization that my brothers were upstairs all night left me cold. I stood up from the couch and quickly marched upstairs to my room, praying I could just fall asleep and put this whole thing behind me. Unfortunately, I wasn't so lucky. 30 minutes into my restless shuffling, I was alerted to the sound of my bedroom door opening ever so gently. Jolting upward from my bed and opening my eyes, I became frozen as I saw, in the corner, a young girl with long black hair, around the age of 6, in a once white nightgown. She stared at me with dark, unblinking eyes and a wide smile. It was the kind of smile that you muster up for family picture day in the sense I could tell it was for show. I began to open my mouth, hoping to scream or cry, anything that might scare her away. Before I could make my decision, she pulled her bony finger up to her still smiling mouth. "Shh." Now it's my turn to hide. I yelled louder than I had ever yelled in my life. To my surprise, my mom came running into my room. "Honey, what's wrong?" she asked, as I darted my eyes between her and the now empty corner of my bedroom. I couldn't answer. Was it a nightmare? Was my mind playing tricks on me? One thing was for sure, it was over. I shrugged it off as an all-too-real bad dream and went out to sleep on the couch in the living room. Fast forward about 3 weeks. It was around 10:30 and I was out playing Spot with Phil and nearly a dozen other neighborhood kids. For those of you wondering, Spot is a game of hide-and-seek played at night with flashlights. The rules were simple. We had to stay within our block, we weren't to go into backyards without permission, and you couldn't stay in one place for more than 5 minutes. I had been gearing up for this evening's game all week. I had the perfect hiding spot and nobody would ever think to look there. Our next-door neighbors had a split-level house with a red deck off of the kitchen upstairs and plenty of room underneath for storage. Their yard wasn't fenced in, so it had easy access. I made my way under the deck and positioned myself behind their lawnmower. No way anyone will find me here, I thought. I had been crouched for around 3 minutes when I saw the beam of light coming from between the houses. My friend, Mike, was it, and he was running with his flashlight, nearing my hiding spot. Without hesitation, he turned at the edge of the house, shined the light directly on me, and yelled, "Spot!" There's no way he knew I was there. "How did you do that? Did Phil tell you about my hiding spot?" As I asked the question, I could tell he was paying little attention to me while he searched the area. "Where did she go?" Mike asked, a little hesitant. "I've been chasing her for half a block and I just watched her duck under this deck." I couldn't tell if he was trying to play a trick on me or if he was being genuine. Although I didn't want to know the answer, I asked, "What was she wearing?" As he answered, I felt a rush of cold all the way up my back, as if someone had splashed me with ice water. She had a long, kinda grayish pajama shirt on. It was really strange. Must be somebody's little sister. I leapt out from underneath the deck and stared at him for several seconds, reading his expressions. "Mike, I've been under here this whole time, and you're the first person I've seen." With the small amount of light from his flashlight illuminating only a portion of his face, I watched his color fade. "Whatever. This game's for babies anyway. I'm going home," he stated, visibly shaken, but doing his best to keep his composure. "You're it now." He shoved the flashlight into my chest and walked quickly in the direction of his house. Although Mike was gone, I had a sudden awareness that I was not alone. Doing my best to avert my eyes from my once great hiding place, I pointed my flashlight back toward the street. My legs struggled to lift my feet. It was as if hands had emerged from the soft ground and clasped their menacing fingers around my ankles. In a desperate attempt to run, my legs had a different plan as I crashed, face first, into the wet grass. I lied on the ground, stunned for what felt like only a few seconds. Gathering my wits, I lifted my head to see bare, pale feet resting only inches from my nose. "Ah!" I screamed, suddenly sitting but leaning back on my hands. I had no words. That girl, the same one from my room, was standing over me. What once had been a vacant grin was replaced with a disgusting, angry snarl. "That was my hiding spot!" Her voice now a high-pitched shriek like thick nails on a dirty classroom chalkboard. Her shadowed eyes pierced through me like a hot blade as she began to cry. She continued with a much quieter, more sinister tone. "It's your fault." It was at that moment I knew she wasn't talking about the game anymore. She lunged forward, flailing her arms while she fell on top of me. I struggled to grab at her frozen wrists and hollered for anyone close who might be able to come help me. I caught one last glimpse of those sinister eyes before everything went black. I awoke to the sound of footsteps creeping up to me. "I'm sorry," I proclaimed, weak and covered in sweat. Just then a hand reached down and grabbed my arm. It was Phil. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Everyone is going home now. We didn't know where you were, and it's getting late." As I stood up, I realized I wasn't in our neighbor's backyard anymore. I had somehow managed to end up in my own driveway, just a few feet from the front steps. "Are you hurt? What happened?" My brother was beginning to show worry at my lack of response. I don't know." I stood there, still puzzled at how I had come to be in the driveway. "Well, we'd better go in. It's almost midnight," Phil continued. "Wait, what?" The words left my mouth and I began to grow more and more concerned as to what might have happened after I blacked out. I had to tell him. There was a good chance he would think I was crazy, but I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. "I saw this girl." The front porch light came on and our dad stepped outside. He didn't have to say anything. We knew it was time to come in. The nightmares started that night. I lied in bed, staring at the ceiling for hours and doing my best not to look anywhere else when I felt my eyelids getting heavy. With each flutter, I could picture her face, staring at me with that look of hatred and disgust. I fought the fatigue for as long as I could, finally succumbing to the night. They say you only remember bits and pieces of dreams and lose sight of what little you had as time marches on. But the horrors that plagued my subconscious for the next several nights are still as vivid and frightening as they were 17 years ago, reappearing every now and then as not to let me forget. My first dream started out normal enough. I was with a couple of friends who have asked to remain nameless, and we were headed to an area near our house we all called Cherry Hill. It spanned several blocks and housed lots of trees, trails, hills, and even an old train trestle. We did all sorts of stuff there. We built forts, rode bikes, played tag, the stuff you'd expect kids to do. We were walking down the trail, boards and tools in hand, looking for just the right spot to build. Settling on an area tucked in by the trestle, we got to work. I was nailing some small boards to a tree to make a ladder leading up to a long edge. It was to be our lookout. I could hear my friends digging some kind of hole behind me. After a while, the sound of their shovels stopped. That same chill I had felt under the deck was inching up my legs to my back, then to my neck. I whipped around to see that they were gone. In fact, everything was gone. The shovels, the hole. It was as if they had never been there at all. It had gotten very dark. The giant trees were blocking any trace of light shining from the evening sky. As I strained my eyes to scan the area, I locked in on a familiar nightgown across the small stream of murky water. I was panicked. Frozen in fear, I watched as she grew closer, never moving her limbs. She threw her head back in a disgusting cackle befitting a woman well her senior. I closed my eyes, hoping that would somehow slow my pounding heartbeat. Silence. Wasn't ready to open my eyes. My mind was racing and I couldn't decide if I was awake or asleep. Before I had a chance to come to any conclusion, I felt a soft tug on my wrist. They're gone now. Will you play with me? It was that same soft voice I had heard in my basement. It wasn't creepy or angry. If I had to think of a word for it, I would say it almost sounded scared. No longer feeling threatened, I was ready to open my eyes. What a horrible mistake. She stood only inches from me, covered in blood but with no visible wounds. Through the gore, I could see the frills of her gown, now torn and crimson. The more frightened I became, the more pleased she seemed with herself. Turning to run, I had made it only a few steps before tripping and crashing into the cold dirt. I had to compose myself. I sat up and glanced at the object that forced me to topple over. "Oh my God, no!" The words left my mouth as I stumbled back even further. There, laid out in a heaping mess, were my friends. Next to them was a shovel, covered in blood and hair. She stood over the bodies, that menacing grin returning to her face, and she slowly brought her finger up to her lips. Shh. I awoke on the living room couch. I know I fell asleep on my own bed, but with a history of sleepwalking, I wasn't surprised. One thing was for certain, I wasn't going back to sleep. I turned on the TV and watched infomercials until morning. I finally got up to make myself a bowl of cinnamon toast crunch as the rest of the family emerged from their rooms. I wanted to tell them what was happening to me, but I was sort of famous in our house for stupid nightmares. To this day, I still catch guff about the big green duck with a machine gun that would chase me around the neighborhood. Nobody was going to take me seriously. I had to find a way to handle this on my own. That night, before bed, I knelt down next to my bed and I locked my hands together in prayer. Dear Lord, I need your help. There is something evil here that won't leave me alone. I don't know why it would choose me. Did I do something wrong? I beg of you, Lord, please stop this. I will never ask you for anything ever again. Amen. I was dream-free for the next 2 nights. Maybe there was something to this prayer thing. It was Saturday and a few of us had gotten together for a game of street hockey. We must have played for at least 2 hours before someone said, "Let's go to Cherry Hill." As soon as I heard it, that cold chill raced up my back. I think I'm going to stay here, guys. They weren't having that. After lots of prodding and pleading, we hopped on our bikes. We stayed near the entrance, making dangerous ramps, out of leftover boards from our hockey goals. I wasn't that excited about going toward the trestle, but I figured there was strength in numbers. We were pointing out spots that would be ideal for a new fort. "There's a good spot," I said. pointing to a wall of dirt with an area already dug out. I was quickly outvoted as it was clear someone else had already claimed that area. We ventured down the trail until we neared the old trestle. This spot is too open. I pled my case and hoped for the best. It must have been, let's do, the opposite of what Jamie wants to do day. Because everyone ignored me and headed down toward the water. Not wanting to let my fears get the best of me, I followed. I walked toward the lookout ledge from my dream. It was as if something was pulling me in that direction. Glancing at the tree, I noticed letters etched out in the bark. They spelled out, "Shh." I was done. No more fort building for me. I jumped on my bike and sped home. I was still shaking when I pulled into the driveway. I refused to come to the door when a couple of my friends stopped over to check on me. I lied in bed, sobbing and cursing the ceiling. "Why won't you help me? I begged for your help and you didn't listen." I cried myself to sleep. My next nightmare was much shorter. It was a very strange dream in that I felt like I was watching a slideshow. I remember watching an old, run-down farmhouse slowly fall to a pile of junk, but it was in pictures with each one showing more age and decay. There was a tree in the front yard with a tire swing, and in every image there were children running around and playing. They didn't seem fazed by the crumbling house behind them. As the house aged, fewer kids were seen running around until only one remained. I watched as the last little girl stared at the ground, sad that her friends had left her. I watched her sadness turn to anger and then into resentment. The background grew dark and her eyes met mine. The edges of her mouth turned up into that all too familiar grin. She knew I was watching her. She stood still for several minutes as the wind blew through the bare trees behind her. Suddenly everything went dark and I heard the whisper, "What should we play next?" I avoided my room for the next several nights, finding any reason I could to stay up well past my bedtime. Although I feared coming across her while I was alone in the dark, it somehow felt safer than meeting her in a dream. She could manipulate me in my nightmares. I couldn't look away. I tried obscene amounts of Mountain Dew, bright lights from the TV, and music to avoid surrender to the night. I finally figured out that if I slept during the day, she left me alone. I still wonder to this day if she was fueled by my fear. I was calmed by the light of day. It kept me safe. I had nearly forgotten all about her by the time she visited me. Again. Weeks had passed and I had started sleeping in my bed again. This final encounter was, by far, the creepiest. I consider this my final encounter because I truly believe any dreams since then have been residual, albeit terrifying. I awoke to the wind blowing my curtains across my face. This was significant because I have terrible allergies and am unable to sleep with the windows open. As soon as my eyes opened, I could hear faint laughter coming from the front yard. It almost sounded like the overused laugh track that goes with any clip of children playing in movies and television. I attempted to sit up and quickly realized I had no control of my own movements. I felt paralyzed. Before long, I was lifted out of bed and placed, standing on my bedroom floor. I began walking toward the window, still unable to move my own limbs. At the screen, I watched as this beautiful little girl skipped and sang through the grass without notice of the world around her. This time I didn't feel as if she knew I was there. Mesmerized for nearly a full minute, I finally snapped out of it to find I was no longer in my own room. From my surroundings, I could tell that this bedroom belonged to a girl. The walls were covered in bright pinks, purples, and yellows with tons of princess dollhouses, Barbies and dresses scattered along the floor and in the open closet. I stood in the middle of the room, still unable to move, and watched as the door flew open, and that same little girl from the front yard came running in, crying. When she dashed by me without looking, I didn't think that she could see me. Had I become the ghost? The girl jumped into the closet and her eyes locked onto mine. As footsteps grew louder down the hall, she looked at me, put her finger up to her mouth, and gave a soft, "Shh." Who was she hiding from? Why was she crying? I stood and watched, as a tall man wearing a baseball cap, red t-shirt, and jeans marched into the room with a menacing, come out wherever you are." The little girl kept her stare on me as tears rolled down her face. I tried to ask him who he was looking for, but he didn't respond. Couldn't he see me? His tone quickly changed. Where the hell did that botter go? I still couldn't tell if he knew I was there, but I knew she must be hiding for a reason, so I decided to keep my mouth shut. He gave one last look around the room and left. I watched him walk down the hallway until I could no longer see him, and when I turned to the closet, she was gone. In the blink of an eye, all of the room's bright colors turned to shades of gray. I heard shouts coming from another room in the house. Without hesitation, I ran toward the screams. When I got into the living room, the little girl was lying on the floor. This time, she was wearing that same nightgown from my earlier visions. The man in the ball cap was standing over her, and I could tell that she was uncomfortable. Let's play a game, sweetie. It's called the quiet game. Although his words were sweet, I knew his intentions were anything but. She was terrified. Her eyes were telling a story of fear and sadness. I panicked. Leave her alone. I yelled the words as loudly as I could. I'm not sure what I was expecting to happen, but my shouts fell on deaf ears. It was no use. She turned again to look at me. I began to feel lightheaded, like I was losing oxygen. Everything went dark, but I could still hear the faint cries of a scared little girl. The cries were followed by wet, gurgling sounds, and that's when I heard the sound that still gives me chills as I write these words. As if he was right by my face, I heard the man whisper one last request. Shh. I woke up right after that, and sobbed in my bed for what seemed like hours. Aside from the occasional nightmare, I haven't seen the little girl since. Although I haven't seen her, I still feel like she's around. I've spent time in libraries and news archives hoping to come across a story of a familiar missing girl, or maybe even something on the man in the cap. I believe my dream of the deteriorating house means the potential scene of the crime is long gone. I suppose it's best that I leave it be. But the question I fear will forever go unanswered is, was I just a kid with an overactive imagination, or was a frightened little girl reaching out for help that I failed to provide? Sweet dreams. Story 5. The story of her holding an orange. Okay, guys. Before I begin, I gotta give you a fair warning. This story is absolutely true, unfortunately. It is also very long. It goes back to my childhood, but it wasn't as terrifying until very recently. Now I am completely lost in fear. I am an adult man, logical and intelligent, or I'd like to believe so, sitting in my bed, scared shitless right now, goosebumps all over my body and tears of horror in my eyes. I ask for your help in explaining this fucking horrifying thing. Caution. You'll notice that I curse quite a bit. I want you to know that what you read from now on is the situation perceived by my mind. I like to think that I am a very rational person, and I haven't been able to explain these occurrences in any natural way. Since my mom got a new job, she started making new friends. It is common in our country that friends come to each other's houses for a cup of coffee, cake, gossip, and whatnot. Few weeks into her new job, my mom made friends with this woman, Rose. She would come maybe twice a week, and they'd sit around the coffee table on our balcony and just talk. One day when I was 17, I was at the balcony with them. I'm not sure why I was there, but knowing me, I probably ran out of internet hours. Back in a day, we bought internet monthly per hour in my country, and was bored as fuck. So we're sitting there, they're gossiping about who knows what, and Mom gets up to go get some cake she had baked recently. I remained sitting at the table with Rose, and that's when my life changed forever. Rose was a good-looking woman. She was about 5'6", skinny, long black hair, pearly white teeth. Attractive woman overall. So anyways, I am sitting there with her, and she turns to me. She has this creepy grin on her face. Bright red lipstick with bright white teeth underneath are just making it look more scary. Her head is moving slowly, almost as if she became a puppet. She says something in the lowest tone possible, certainly not loud enough for me to understand. "Excuse me?" I say, still not being scared, just a bit weirded out. "You ready? To go now?" She said this in a voice of a child, I kid you not, like maybe an 8-year-old girl. Grin is still there. She mustered those words through her teeth, never opening the jaw. "What?" I ask, starting to get scared. "You ready?" The same thing again. Only this time she pulls out an orange out of her purse. That's it, she just took the orange out and held it there. Didn't offer it, didn't eat it herself, just held the fucking thing. At that point, I was getting scared as fuck. Thankfully, my mom came with the cake. Rose, almost as if someone pushed a button on a remote control, switched back to her normal self, putting the orange back into her purse without my mom noticing. I left the balcony creeped out, but I was 17, so I brushed it off quickly. That night, I had trouble sleeping. My room is on the first floor, and my window is at a maybe 5 height. So I kept looking at it, praying not to see some scary monster. I would turn in my bed constantly and look at the window maybe every 5 minutes. It was getting late and I started to doze off, but decided to look into the window one last time. And there she fucking was, standing in the fucking window. Rose, just standing, looking directly at me. Moonlight was bright enough for me to see, with the same grin on her face. Lipstick was red as ever and teeth were wither than ever. I was paralyzed with fear. I often imagined what I'd do in situations like these, and I always had an escape plan for any hypothetical I threw at myself. But now, when this friend of my mother's was staring at me through my window at 4 a.m. just smiling, I was motionless. My mouth got dry, I got goosebumps. Have them now as I type this. And I swear it became freezing in my room. Probably just the way the body reacts to shock. I finally gathered the courage to get up. I started walking towards the door. Head was turning with me, slowly, with the grin still there. Again, it was as if she were a puppet. I wanted to scream for my parents, but knowing how tense they are, I decided not to cause panic just yet. There had to be some rational explanation, right? For fuck knows what reason, I decided to walk to the window and ask her what the fuck her problem was. I made 2 slow steps towards it and froze. I froze because she moved. You know what her movement was? Taking the orange out of her purse. Does anyone know what the record time is for having goosebumps? Because they sure as shit aren't going away. Anyways, after being terrified for a minute, I decide to go on. I am a big guy and figured I'd be able to fight her off if push comes to shove. My windows pull up in order to open. I pull it open maybe some 10 inches and stop. She's not moving, just holding the fucking orange and looking at me with the scariest grin you'll ever see. I stand there. She stands there. Then she starts bending. But every move she makes is so slow, so mechanical. She's bending so she can reach the open part of the window. I'm horrified. She pushes her head through it, just enough space for her head to go through. You go with me now? As she's saying that, in her 8-year-old voice, her hand is making its way through the crack holding an orange. What do I do? What you do? Fucking run. I run out of my room, screaming for my dad. My dad, being a light sleeper, he jumps out of his bed and screams back at me, asking what the hell is going on. All I can muster to say is Rose window. While Dad is putting his pants on, I run back to my room, wanting Rose to be there so he can see that I am not crazy. You know, how in horror movies the person you saw is gone by the time witnesses come. Yeah, well, similar thing happened, except I caught Rose leaving. There is a house some 100 yards away from mine, and it had one of those motion-activated lights. Lots of crime back home. I saw the light turn on, and a glimpse of Rose disappearing behind that house. By the time Dad ran into my room, she was gone. After much talking, he decided that it was just a nightmare and told me to call him only if someone physically comes into my room. You and your fucking imagination, he said, walking away. Needless to say, I got exactly 0 hours of sleep that night. Nothing happened in the next few months. Rose would still come to visit my mom, but I'd make sure I wasn't there. Fuck that. As in every teenager's life, so many things were happening around me, and I forgot about the Rose incident. Then one day I was spending my afternoon browsing internet, years before Reddit, unfortunately. I got pretty hungry, so as any spoiled child, I yelled from my room to see if my mom would come. She didn't. Oh, well, tough luck. I have to go to the kitchen and make myself a sandwich. Kitchen in our house is connected to the living room, but you can't see the living room until you're at least in the middle of the kitchen. So I open the kitchen and walk in. I freeze. There it is. Right there on the kitchen table. An orange. Immediate thought of that creepy night. Rose is here. I am still motionless in my spot. Few seconds later, I realize how stupid I am for relating a common piece of fruit to a crazy window stalker. So I walk towards the table, wanting to put the orange back in the fruit cabinet. I grab the thing and hear the voice behind me. "You will have to come with me soon, you know." Child's voice. It's Rose. I produce some kind of noise resembling scared pig about to get slaughtered. Lightning fast, I turn around and there she is, standing in the middle of the living room. Just standing there, same grin on her face, same lipstick on her lips, teeth white as ever. Only she started tilting her head to the left a bit in slow motion. I remember it as if it happened yesterday. Her long black hair falling down her shoulders, white summer dress, bright red shoes, to match her lipstick. I forgot to mention that she was very pale. Even in the summer, she seemed to not be friends with the sun. This added to creepiness. There's this woman who already scared the shit out of me once, standing alone in the middle of my living room, pale as a ghost, bright red lipstick and shoes, tilting her head to the side, speaking in child's voice. Then she takes an orange out of her purse, takes it out slowly and looks at me as if she wants me to have it. Just as my self-defense mode is about to take over and I either run away or tackle the crazy bitch, my mom walks in. I know it didn't happen, but it seemed like my mom brought the light into the room. I released a breath of relief. Rose, of course, went back to her normal self. They were about to go for a walk, and my mom was getting ready in her room, while she was pulling her grudge shit on me. Since my parents wouldn't believe anything I was saying about her, I wasn't sure what to do. Only thing I could do at that age is nothing, I suppose. But I swore I'd punch that woman should she ever come close to me again. A year or so had passed without any incidents, and I was getting ready to go to the United States to study in college. Since I was going to play basketball there, I had to prepare for it. I spent summer away from home, working out in a training camp in a town about 40 miles from my city. During the last night of the camp, the last incident happened. My roommate had left the camp the day before and I had the room to myself. I was very excited about going to America in a few days and had trouble sleeping. My room had a beautiful balcony. I was on the 3rd floor of a hotel. Since it was warm, I decided to sit in the chair on the balcony for a while. I walked out, sat down, and immediately regretted it. It is really time to come now. I nearly shit myself. I mean, it's been a while since I last heard that voice, but something like that stays with you forever. I turned my head to the right, and Rose was standing on the fence of a balcony of the room next to mine. Mind you, not standing on the balcony or sitting at the table, but standing on the fence. How she was balancing, I don't know. Balcony was at least 50 feet from the ground, and she was holding the orange. Fucking orange. Only this time, orange seemed to have been somewhat rotten, not nearly as bright as the first 3 times. I was scared that she would attempt to jump over to my balcony, as there was only a few feet distance between them. I was also scared she'd die and attempt to do so and I'd be blamed somehow. I had no idea what the fuck was going on. It really is time, you know. She said it in that childlike voice, never opening her jaw, her teeth forever clenched, together and lipstick the color of fresh blood. She seemed even paler this time and her head was tilted to the left even more. She wore red shoes. "What the fuck do you want from me?" I screamed in desperation, angry that this woman is causing me so much distress, but also hoping that someone would hear me and come witness this crazy bitch's harassment. "I only want you to go where you belong." She said that, and again, never opened her teeth. She only sprang her hand more towards me, almost offering me that semi-rotten orange. "Fuck you, you crazy bitch." I opened the door of my room, and as I was walking in, I heard, "You will come." I slammed the door. Deciding this woman was schizophrenic, I would have probably flipped out more, but I was leaving the continent in few days, at which point I was safe. Wrong. I know I have a wall of fucking text, but this is the shortest version of these creepy events. I came to the US, and have been here for 7 years now. I forgot about the incidents and went on with my life. Only time I ever thought about Rose was when talking to my mom, who said that since I left, her friendship with the crazy bitch fell apart. I was glad. Last 7 years were the best of my life. I got bachelor's and master's degrees, I got a wonderful girlfriend, you know, life's good, man. But then, But fucking then. I am a big technology geek and I love Apple. Don't shoot me down for this, please. So it was last Friday, September 21st, the release of iPhone 5. I am in front of the store with about 50 other people. I am maybe 15th in line. It's raining. It's cold. I've been there for about 4 hours now. Doors finally open. We start moving in slowly. I look across the street and instantly stop. People run into my back. I can hear complaining. But it's all bouncing off of me. Across the street, I see a woman in a white dress, head tilted, holding something orangish, grin on her face. Lipstick so bright red I can see it from across the street. I can't move. Someone from far in the back pushes, causing me to fall. While I gather myself, I see the woman disappearing behind the corner. I remain sitting on the ground. It was Rose. It was her, I swear. I sit there for a few minutes, get myself together, and walk in the store. No phones left. I decide to walk across the street, and there it was. At the place where she was standing now only sits a mushed, terribly rotten orange. That's it. Just a rotten orange. I started crying. All memories came back. I thought that my whole life would constitute of being stalked by some maniac. And how did she find me anyways? I spent next few hours in a nearby coffee shop drinking tea and reasoning how this could be logically possible. I kept no secret from my friends and family about my whereabouts. Did she stalk my Facebook? My friends? Did she travel here to harm me? What the fuck is her deal? Answering no questions I asked myself, I went home, deciding to keep it all to myself. My girlfriend noticed something was wrong with me for the next few days but didn't push it. I figured it was all a fluke, my mind playing tricks because I was up all night before that morning. Plus it was raining. How could I see that well? And that orange, well, that was just a coincidence. I convinced myself that I was just making it all up. So today, a letter came. I get a lot of mail, so it's not that out of the ordinary, but there was this envelope with no return address. I opened it and was immediately shocked. I was holding a Polaroid picture. In it, there was me, standing in line in front of the store last Friday. Only the picture was taken by a person behind me. It was taken at the moment I was looking across the street. I can tell because I could see the horror on my face. On the back of the photo there were few words written with a black pen. You come with me now. I dropped the picture and started crying like a baby, like really crying my ass off. My girlfriend found me in our room, curled up on bed, still crying. She was terrified that maybe someone close to us had died, as she's never seen me let a single tear before. I had to tell her. I started telling her the story, leaving most details out so I can get to the point quicker. As I was talking, she was getting more and more pale. She never said a word. I finished my story and she was pale as ghost, not moving. Then she asked a fucking question that honestly caused me to almost faint. She said, "This woman, did she happen to, hold an orange?" I froze. She started crying like I've never seen her cry before. We had a long talk that night and her story would require another wall of text. Honestly, I am fucking tired from typing this much and I'm pretty sure nobody will be willing to read this much. I am also lost, terrified, confused. But if someone does read this, I'll write the rest. I'll write in hope that someone can offer a solution and an answer maybe. Currently, we are both scared as fuck, not knowing what to do next. Police is an option, but what do we tell them? I don't know, man. I am fucking scared for mine and her well-being. Help me. Update. Well, guys, shit, don't know what to tell you. It happened again today. Except I didn't see her. Let me give you a quick rundown of events. AM. I go to the local police station with my girlfriend. We tell them all that we know and show them the Polaroid. Although quite friendly, they say they really can't do much other than maybe file a restraining order against the person who probably, their words, isn't even in the country. They think I mistook her for someone else in the picture. Well, they said it was probably a prank. They did take the photo and open a file about it just in case it escalates. It did. 2 p.m. We arrived in town where I saw her. Went to the location. There was nothing there. Don't know what the hell I expected anyways. We stayed there for a while. 30 p.m., arriving home. Front door of the house is open, but this is not uncommon as we live with 5 other roommates. We go upstairs to our room. Our room is open. That is unheard of as we always make sure we lock it. And our landlord is the only other person who has the key. I yell asking if someone is there, no response. Also, no roommates are in the house it seems. We walk in. We freeze. Our room is decently small, constitutes of 2 queen-size beds put together and a little dresser, and that's about it. So what did we see? Pillows are all on our dresser. Towels on the bed. Our sheet is taken off the bed and put on the floor. It is spread out. In the center of it is an orange cut in 2 halves with a little peel next to it. My laptop is facing the door and is playing the same song on repeat. My laptop was turned off before I left and was also password protected. The song playing is my favorite from childhood, Africa by Toto. My desktop background was changed to one picture from my childhood that I didn't even have in the computer. PM. We call the police, they arrive 15 minutes later. I take about 5 pics of the mess just before they come. They say they'll start an investigation, but claim that it's still not serious enough for fingerprints and stuff. 30 p.m. They leave and tell us to call should anything happen. Again. And also advise us to stay with friends if possible. We spent next few hours just talking, man. Trying to figure it out. We're exhausted both mentally and physically. I'm going to Skype with my mom tomorrow and see if she knows anything. I will type up my GF story tonight, but may post it in the morning if I don't finish it all. In time. I will include photos I took, I promise you that much. Holy fuck, this shit is happening to me. Story 6. My grandfather grew up on a chicken farm outside of Krakow, Poland. He passed away a few years ago at the age of 82. A few days before his passing on, due to an aggressive form of stomach cancer, he sat me down next to him in his old rocking chair and said in his familiar Polish accent, "After I took the boat to New York, I promised to leave this story behind." He didn't look up as he spoke to me, simply staring into his cup of black coffee. It's been 70 years, and I must tell someone before I meet God. I was born in a small, quaint, empty town which, despite the Nazi occupation, still functioned. We lived in this 2-bedroom farmhouse, my father, mother, and my brothers Michal and Igor. I'm sorry you never got to meet any of them. Anyway, Michal and Igor were twins, identical twins actually, and we had heard rumors of the Nazi fascination with identical twins. This forced us to be even more reserved, even though we already lived in a secluded part of the countryside, in the last occupied house in the town. In order to avoid going into the occupied towns, we basically ate only chicken and eggs for every meal, and whatever else Mama could gather from the garden. It was lonely, but we survived. The thing that was most difficult for me was the fact I had to sleep in the basement. Due to Michelle and Igor being toddlers, they required my father and mother's attention. The basement was cold, with only a small window, and the moonlight was the only light I got. Because of this, I always delayed, going down there until I was absolutely exhausted so I wouldn't have to lie there awake. On the nights that I couldn't manage to sleep, I would look out of the window, which gave me a small view of the garden and the large, abandoned water well. This was my daily activity throughout those lonely, war-torn nights. In general, it was boring and uneventful, but occasionally I would catch a glimpse of a family, or even just a man or 2 lovers sneaking their way through our garden up to our front door. They always looked rushed and frightened and sometimes wore tattered uniforms. What would follow were horrible sounds of banging and pleadings for whoever lived there to open up, followed by an argument between my father and mother over whether we should let them in. He moved in the chair to adjust himself. "You see, son, we didn't know it. Well, at least I didn't. That we lived fairly close to the Auschwitz concentration camp, and that those people were escapees." "Well, did your father let them in?" I asked impatiently. "No," he said. "It would have been a death sentence for them as well as for us. The Nazis didn't like Poles, but they tolerated us, and it was easier to hide Michael or Igor than an entire family. My father did what he had to do in order to keep his family alive. As the war went on, fewer and fewer people began showing up in the middle of the night. That's about the time our chicken and vegetables began to disappear, losing our only supply of food would not have been tolerable, and at that point my father suspected it was the escapees, so he built a fence around our property. Despite this, the chickens continued to disappear. They weren't killed. They were simply gone. Just vanished from their cages and pens. One night I decided to stay up myself in order to see if I could find out the answer. I battled my tiredness until the wee hours of the morning, and despite the poor lighting and rain, I caught a glimpse of what seemed to be a human figure run across the garden. I rushed upstairs to tell my father, and he ran outside with a knife. The best home defense weapon we could afford, but we found nothing. No one. The next day we did find something though. Footprints. Leading from the chicken cages to the water well. They were made in the wet mud from the rain, and they were of bare feet, no shoes, no socks, just feet. My father had mercy on the man who was trying to find refuge and left him a note, indicating that he had 2 days to leave and then he would begin to seal the well. I waited impatiently for my grandfather to tell me about the fate of the man. The following night I got the idea to take a blanket down the well to the man since winter was creeping in. I waited until my parents were asleep and I snuck outside. I shouted something friendly down the well, indicating to the poor man that my intentions were benign, and I began my descent, clinging hand and foot to the pegs attached to the stones. As I neared the bottom, I smelled something absolutely horrific, and I pulled my father's flashlight from my pocket to try and shine it on the man. It was then I came to the realization of just how large the well was, having been used to supply water for the entire town and its families in the past, families which no longer remained. But I found no man, only a hole, a gap in the stone where the wall of the well had collapsed, opening up to some type of crevice only 2 meters wide and 3 meters deep and tall. Inside sat not a man, but an entire family, of which only a single skeleton-like creature survived. The light reflected off of its sunken eyes and gray skin. Blood covered its face and chicken carcasses were strewn everywhere, a pile of decomposing poultry beside a woman and what I suspected had been her son and daughter, children who couldn't have been much more than 5 years old, and they seemed to have been dead for weeks. The man, if he even could be called that, just gazed at the light and I stared back, incapable of breaking his stare. I did not feel threatened by him, for he lacked any aggression whatsoever. He simply crouched motionlessly, without a sound, next to the putrefying bodies of his loved ones and the chickens that must have been his source of water, as their meat was uneaten. He was empty, devoid of whatever in us makes us human. He should have realized the members of his family had died long ago, but he was still bringing food for their corpses. He couldn't accept it. He did finally turn his head, though, when I shone the light back onto the corpse of his daughter. He stared at her, and then sat down closer to her and continued his vigil. "You can leave now," I said to him. "I'll open the gate so you can escape. My father will seal the well in the morning. Please leave now." My young voice and advice seemed to have no effect on him. At that moment I decided it would be better for me to just climb back up the well and leave, and hoped the man would follow and escape. As I began my climb, I shone the light on him one final time. "What did you see, Grandpa?" I shuddered. I saw a tear fall from his eye. He had become a man once again. He was only able to break free from the delusion after seeing the body of his daughter, which had until that time been obscured by the darkness. He realized then that he had been bringing food not to his family, but to corpses. That night it rained again, but in the morning when my father returned to seal the well, I found no footprints leading out of it. Story 7 Safe. My mother loved me. From my first memory, she was always there, pulling me out of harm's way. I was a curious child and was constantly reaching for the hot stove or wandering outside unsupervised. Sometimes the harm she protected me from was my own father. Everything I said and did seemed to irritate him, and any loud noise or even a single word he perceived as disrespectful could earn a backhand across the face, or a swift kick in the back to send you flying down the steps. I clung to her tightly. In those years, as she was the only constant, never angry or impatient with me, but full of love and hope. She stood in between his hand and my fragile body, and I'm ashamed to say that I ran and hid more than once, as he took his anger out on my dear mother. My grandparents lived across town and were anxious for me to get of an age where I could spend the weekend or the summer. Most little boys would be excited about a weekend at his grandparents', but I feared the time when I would be forced to endure the hard, back-breaking summers my older cousins had seen. The grandparents thought that hard labor was the only way a Tiao boy would grow into a strong man. As they had a large farm to tend to, they made use of their grandsons by raising them for the better part of their childhood, usually starting around 5 or 6, depending on the constitution of the boy. My cousins slept in the leaky barn out back and existed on whatever scraps were thrown out at the end of the day. By the end of the summer, they permeated an odor that may never wash off, an odor of sadness and pain. My female cousins lived inside the house and would never speak of the horrors they endured. Women weren't valued much in my family except for one thing. When I was barely 5, my mother woke me up in the middle of the night, covering her hand across my mouth and signaling for me to keep quiet. Her bruised face was wet from tears, and her hand shook as she silently begged me not to do anything to attract the attention of my sleeping father. Without a sound, we snuck out of the house, taking only my stuffed teddy bear, leaving behind everything I had ever known. My mother and I kept to the back roads as we made our journey across several states, to the house on the river where her brother lived. Her brother made his living as a teacher at the small schoolhouse in town, and was a widow with no children of his own. By the time we arrived at his door, we were weak from hunger and exhaustion. My mother hadn't stopped to sleep the whole way, too afraid that my father or his family would catch up with her unaware. My uncle hadn't always lived here, had arrived here only a few short months before, and as my mother had not been permitted to keep contact with her family, she knew of his location only by the chance meeting of a distant relative while selling some items in town. Even at my young age, I was able to understand that this meant we were safe. They couldn't find us here. Suddenly, my world didn't look so bleak and depressing. I would no longer suffer my father's wrath for playing too loudly in the backyard, or getting up to get a drink of water after I was supposed to be asleep. I suppose that given my history, I should have been wary of this new man, but he exuded a calm demeanor, and my natural instincts told me that he would never hurt me. For 2 years, my mother and I lived in peace in my uncle's house by the river. My mother started working at a small shop in town, and I went to school with my uncle. At night, we would eat dinner in the small kitchen and talk about our day. I spent my summers down by the river, fishing or watching the grass grow. I developed a fast friendship with a boy down the road, and we never spent a weekend apart, riding bikes and playing in the woods. It was a sweet time, the best of my childhood memories, but nothing good lasts forever. My mother took ill in the winter I was 7. I was looking forward to Christmas and the break from school, and sleepovers and late-night marshmallow roasting. But then my mother was sick and everyone got very sad. It seemed only a week passed where she went from happy and rosy to pale and withdrawn in her bed. On the morning of the parade in town, I begged her to take me. My young mind didn't understand real sickness. I had recovered nicely from the years spent with my father, and was now blessed once again with the innocence and selfishness of youth. Mother pulled herself together and off we went. She held my hand and bought me caramel popcorn at the stand. We laughed and giggled for a few minutes. She appeared healthy and whole again. Then she fell. Right there at the parade in front of everyone, my sweet, wonderful mother, who always protected me, fell to the pavement, and I only stared in confusion. My mother was rushed to the hospital in the next town, and I squeezed into a corner and cried, silently. When the nurses came to me and asked me who my father was, what possessed me to utter his name? Why wouldn't I say the name of my quiet uncle, at home at his house on the river? Shock, perhaps, and confusion. I didn't understand that they were asking who to call. No, I answered honestly, and off they went. The nurse pulled me into my mother's room and quietly told me my father and my grandparents were both on the way to claim me. My father to comfort me, and my grandparents to take me back to their farm to stay. What a lucky boy you are to have so many people who love you. You'll be just fine. But now you should stay with your mother for a few minutes and say your goodbyes. They will be here shortly. Inside, I screamed in terror, wanting to run and hide, get away from the miseries that were soon to come. But I couldn't leave my mother. I couldn't leave without saying goodbye. As I held my mother's hand to let a silent tear fall, she opened her eyes. She smiled so sweetly at me and said 2 words before she passed from this world. "You're safe." My mother passed at the stroke of midnight, December 18th, the year I was 7. I curled up next to her body and didn't wake when my uncle scooped me in his arms and carried me home. I didn't know that day what had happened to the 2 different cars traveling towards me in the night to take me away to a terrible place. But I knew I was safe, because my mother had told me so. I grew up in that house by the river with my sweet, sweet uncle. When I was 10, he met a nice lady from town and they married and had 2 children of their own. I was raised as another son, and I was always loved and cared for. Although my new aunt could never replace my darling mother, she took care of me throughout my childhood and never was a word spoken in anger. Never did I sleep in the barn or live on scraps. Never did I have to duck to avoid the fist coming at me in the dark. My first year in college, I became curious about what had happened to change the events that were unfolding in my life on that awful night. I did some research and this is what I learned. At midnight on December 18th, the year I was 7, my father was traveling from one place in his old blue pickup. He had been working out of town when he received the message that his only son had been found. The pickup was old and in disrepair. Still, it was a surprise that at the stroke of midnight his truck suddenly swerved into the path of an oncoming semi, killing him instantly. The driver of the semi walked away with barely a scratch. At midnight, on December 18th, the year I was 7, my grandparents were traveling from their farm across town in their new car, purchased in the last year with proceeds from the farm, and apparently the prostitution of several of their own granddaughters. They were at home when they received word that their grandson had been found. The car was new and not the cheapest model. Therefore, it was a mystery why at the stroke of midnight the car suddenly pulled to the right while on a mountain road, causing the car to go through the weak fence and down into the ravine. My grandparents were killed instantly. There were investigations even into my sweet, calm uncle, as it was found to be a little odd that both of these events should happen at the exact time my mother passed from this world. My uncle never worried me with it, and the investigators finally gave up, as no one could ever prove how it happened. I know how it happened. My mother told me when she uttered those 2 words. "You're safe." Story 8. The Ant Hill. Kids people don't die cleanly. It's messy, miserable work. Everyone fights back regardless of age or gender. It's an animalistic instinct driven by the bolts of adrenaline rushing through their brain. Fight, resist, run, escape live. Those were the thoughts whirling behind the bearded man's eyes as my knife slid into his body. A choked gargle spewed flecks of blood from his cracked lips, which clumped in his greasy beard. His eyes held that primal shine to them. I admired it even as the knife parted his flesh. He clung to me, choked over and over. "Deliver us from evil, O Lord, deliver us." He struggled under me and I watched curiously. His hands left marks on my arms and life fled from his eyes with the permanence of dusk leaking into the night. Sitting back on my haunches, I examined the marks he'd left on my arms. Remnants of my past lived in my skin. Dark streaks cast across my forearms where belts cracked down again and again. Ridges of white scar tissue etched into my fingers and knuckles where knives sliced me to the bone. Long, pale lacerations from whippings crisscrossed along my spine. My eyes sat slightly off-center, a result of the sledgehammer that had cracked my skull when I was 5. I knew I should be dead. Left alone in the desolate wilderness of Quebec, Canada, where a world of complete isolation created the perfect place for a madman to plant the seeds of his new cult. I suppose it would be prudent to provide context as to who I am and where I came from, why I know what the human spirit can endure, how it felt to grow up in a commune run by a religious zealot with a vision that God would smite all but his followers sometime in the conveniently vague future. I was born in the early 70s, on the shortest, darkest day of the year when winter winds ripped at the commune's chapel roof and shook the poorly fitted wood pilings to their core. An exhausted midwife wrapped in a ragged shawl delivered me squalling on a cheap foldable table from the womb of a younger woman bound tightly by her arms and legs. There were screams. From the midwife commanding my mother to push. From our communal leader, Robert Gauthier, leading the 30 or so followers knelt around the table in prayer. from my mother herself, digging deep furrows in the table with her nails. There were screams, and there was blood. Lots of it. Welcome, welcome our new brother in the glory of God on high. Welcome. From this day forth, you shall help us prepare for the time of reckoning when our Lord shall send his vengeful angels down from the heavens to smite the wicked and wreak judgment upon those who do not heed his word. Welcome. Welcome. His followers echoed his call with cries of their own. Welcome, welcome, child of God, welcome. Robert used a grimy knife to slice my umbilical cord and placed me in my mother's arms. Naked, fetid, shivering in the cold, I could remember the moment the warmth left her body. She held me in the crook of her arm and looked up into the rafters of the chapel, and the light left her eyes. A human's will to live. I don't know why. I remember those moments so vividly and not others. Maybe I had been told about them years later and simply believed I'd remembered them. I suppose this was logical. I couldn't recall what happened after the midwife slid me from my mother's arms. Those details were filled in by the kids who'd been praying during my delivery. From what they said, I realized not remembering was perhaps a blessing. Snippets of my mom's lifeless body slung into a wheelbarrow, wheeled out into the cold, and dumped down a mine shaft on the other side of the commune's hill like garbage. That seemed wrong. A violation of her memory. Humans shouldn't treat one another like that. But Robert Gauthier said otherwise. It was our duty, he said, to live through him as he was commanded by the Lord Almighty. We lived a Spartan lifestyle. Simple, brutal, efficient, cruel. My earliest years were relatively unremarkable. Our community lay in the shadow of a hill, a rising knoll perhaps 600 feet high that rose above the surrounding land. The commune consisted of the chapel, a barn, a woodshop, a mess hall, a small medical hut that doubled as Robert's office, and 3 ramshackle halls where the men, women, and children slept apart from one another. The older children were tasked with looking after the younger ones. I found myself placed primarily in the care of a girl named Allie, who was 10 or 11 years older than me. She couldn't be sure of her exact age. The midwife who delivered me was named Cheryl, and she oversaw Allie during my first year or so. After that, it became Allie's job alone. We grew to love one another like siblings. Most of the children, 10 in all, with their ages ranging from infants to early teens, kept close to one another. When we reached 15, we were moved to the adult halls. In total, there were 32 of us. Robert had 3 main disciples, Paul, Carver, and John, all of whom believed wholeheartedly in his stature as the envoy of God. They enforced his bidding with a fervor that bordered on sadism. As I grew up, I quickly learned that not following Robert's word resulted in harsh and often unnecessarily cruel punishments. Robert and his henchmen would spy on the other commune members for any sign of profane or sacrilegious behavior. Then he would confront the offender before the others, a maddened glint in his eye, and scream at them about behaving without purity. "We are the Lord's final bastion of righteousness on this earth," he preached. "We live through his divine will and shall be rewarded in turn when his angels descend upon us. If you do not heed his words as he has spoken them through me, then it falls upon my shoulders to purge the evil from you. We can only summon our Savior by living purely." "What?" he said, filled my head day and night. With no other perspective to understand much of what he was saying, I took his words to heart. These enraged sermons were spat forth with colorful hand gestures and much pacing through our old chapel. I remember sitting quietly among the kids. I was partially hidden by Allie, who did her best to conceal me behind her skinny, pale frame. She and the others would wince when Robert doled out whatever punishment he believed to be appropriate for the offense given. I only watched on with indifference. My mind was numb to the commune's horrors even then. Lighter transgressions, like humming, joking, or not selling enough of the baked goods that composed the bulk of our income, were met with beatings, lashings, and group shunning. Heavier offenses, taking the Lord's name in vain, sexual deviancy, Only he was allowed to have intercourse with the women in the hopes that his seed would strengthen the commune's bloodlines, and suspected defection was left to Robert's constantly fluctuating mood. If he felt merciful, it might be getting left out overnight in the brutal cold or being suspended from the ceiling for extended periods by your thumbs. If his mood turned sour and felt that the presence of the devil and corruption was at work among his members, then one could expect to be cleansed with a chemical enema or to maim themselves with a sledgehammer he often wielded during a session. He would bring the offender out into the center of the room and hand them the hammer, then beseech them to show repentance by striking their leg. Many commune members hobbled awkwardly atop badly knit shin bones and lopsided knees. I remember one time when a boy named Anthony walked in on Robert forcing himself upon one of the commune women. Anthony ran off into the snow and Robert chased after him, drunk and naked and stumbling. A metal flask glinted in his left hand. He saw the rest of the kids gathering firewood at the base of the hill and ordered us to grab Anthony. Terrified, we listened. We dragged Anthony back to the commune, kicking and screaming. He cried and begged us to let him go. I was 5 at the time and believed what he'd done must have been of great insult to the Lord. We marched him back to stand before Robert, who stood there, trembling with rage in the cold winter sun. He had a look on his face like a parent disappointed that their child had been caught lying. He simply glared at Anthony, who begged him for mercy. I'd never seen a 10-year-old repent so extensively or with such passion before. Anthony invoked all the right words, Bible passages, prayers, and words of praise to Robert and the image of God that shone through him. I was impressed. Robert was not. He swayed on his feet and took a swig from the metal flask in his hand. "Tie him up to that tree over there." He pointed. "We're gonna have a stoning." Anthony was tied up. The rough bark of the pine tree dug into his back. His eyes, wide and brown as the earth beneath us, raced from kid to kid. He landed on me last of all, piercing my gaze with a pleading so intense I caught my breath. Allie stepped up to me and pressed something cold into my hand. I looked down at the hard, smooth stone in my hand, then back at Anthony. For the first time in my life, I questioned myself. Was this truly what God wanted? I looked up at Allie. She was 15 now, old enough to be moved into the women's hall, old enough to attract the affections of the man looming over them all. Her jaw was set, and her gaze looked hollow. A tear glittered in the corner of her eye. "Just do what he says," she told me. I looked from her to Anthony and realized they both had the same vacant expression. Lusterless, desperate, devoid of hope. The same look my mother had had. I looked at Anthony once more and whispered, "I'm sorry." Then the first rock smashed into his head. Something cracked inside me that day. By the time Robert, who'd now been joined by Paul and Carver, drunkenly called for us to stop, Anthony was limp against his bindings. Only the tree held him upright. The cold winter air made the deep purple welts along his arms and legs stand out grotesquely. Robert stumbled over to check his pulse. His jagged fingernail dug into the pale flesh just below Anthony's throat. Eventually, Robert nodded and turned back to us. His words were slurred when he spoke. "This is what happens when you disobey. Our Savior won't come if I can't perform my sacred duties. We need new life in this commune." He took another swig from his flask and then pointed to Ali and, "You two take him to the shaft and dump him." We did as we were told. By the time we dragged Anthony up to the mine shaft, his body was stiff from the cold, and rigor mortis had set in. Those brown eyes stared passively into the gray slate of sky above, glassy and empty. I looked down into the shaft and realized, with a start, that the bones of my mother were down there. I hadn't thought about her in a long time. I realized that my last memory of her mirrored the look on Anthony's face now, and wondered what his mother must be thinking. A hand gripped my shoulder. I turned to find Allie beside me, her lips peeled back in a thin grimace. She seemed to know what I was thinking about. "She helped raise me when I was younger," she said. "Protected me from Robert's ways." I nodded. That sounded nice. An unspoken agreement formed between us. Together, we rolled Anthony's body back away from the shaft and into a little cleft below it. There, we buried him under a pile of stones and branches. I still had a lot to figure out, but this felt better than listening to Robert's sermons. We made our way back down the hill in silence. When we got back, the other kids had dispersed to the main hall for supper, but Robert remained outside. He'd gotten dressed at least, but now he held his dreaded sledgehammer in one hand. A sickening grin twisted over his face like a rotting pumpkin, exposing brown teeth and purplish gums. "God told me you didn't do as I asked," he growled. "I said to throw him down the shaft so his blackened soul couldn't taint us anymore. So why'd you bury him instead?" Allie stepped forward. "It was my idea, Robert. Please. You can take me into the hut and we can..." She took a shuddering breath. "We can replace Anthony with a clean, pure soul." "That's mighty noble of you, dear," Robert agreed. He licked his teeth and nodded to Paul and Carver, who were marching back down the hill. I realized they were Robert's so-called message from God. They took Allie by her arms. "But we still gotta repent. Salvation won't come if we don't do as we're told." He raised his sledgehammer and brought it crashing down on my head. The only thing that saved me was Robert's drunkenness. His, swaying through his aim off so that instead of crushing my skull, he only glanced at the top of my head. Still, that was enough to send a thundering shock tearing across my vision in waves of scarlet, purple, and black. My eyesight blurred, then went dark, and something in my mind cracked. I fell to the snow, stunned by the pain. Above me, Paul and Carver grabbed Allie and dragged her screaming toward Robert's hut. Robert regarded me for a moment, snorted, and spat on the ground next to me. He pointed to two nearby commune members and instructed them to drag me to the medical hall. Recovery took 6 months. My cranium was fractured, carving a tight line down my nose to my upper lip. The right side of my face shifted downward, several millimeters, throwing off its symmetry just enough to make people do a double take when they saw me. 2 teeth were knocked out and my eyesight in my right eye became permanently blurry, but I counted myself lucky. In among those moments of horrendous pain and rolling darkness, I held on to the memory of Ali defending me. Of those things she said about my mother, they opened up the possibility of a hope that I hadn't dared to linger on for as long as I could remember. The hope that perhaps Robert wasn't the ultimate power in our tiny, desolate corner of the world. But such thoughts were dangerous, and I had to keep them to myself. As the years passed and I grew, I learned how to slip under the radar of Robert's religious sadism. My later childhood years saw plenty of abuse, but only surface deep. Lashes, beatings, punches, but none of the crippling injuries suffered by so many of the other members of the commune. Over those years, Robert continued to grow crueler and crazier. His judgment day changed dates more than a dozen times. His sermons came at all hours of the day and night, drunken ramblings about God and his avenging angels, and our Savior from the wicked world beyond, and how someday we would be elevated to the gates of heaven. I would listen to his words and think about them, comparing them to the conversations I had with other commune members. Ali, I saw less and less of. She'd soon fallen pregnant after my encounter with the sledgehammer, and her transfer over to the women's hall meant I was left in the care of the other children with whom I had formed no close attachments. I remained quiet and withdrawn, observing the world through my fractured, uneven eyes. Raging headaches would sometimes through my head, roaring against my temples like a winter gale. These would often reduce me to a fetal position on the ground, and I would imagine myself curled up in my mother's arms. One person I did grow closer to during these times was Cheryl, a woman of 40 with brown hair streaked in gray with kindly but cautious brown eyes. She found me during one of my thunderous headaches and bundled me up against her chest. I remember opening my eyes after hours of nausea and realizing then that she was Anthony's mother. "I heard what you did for him," she whispered. "Thank you." That was all that needed to be said. From then on, we formed a cautious but deeply felt connection brought on by the mutual loss of our loved ones. Cheryl proved invaluable in telling me how to steer clear of Robert and his gang. She could weather him because she'd been a seamstress before joining the commune and made many of our crude clothes. Her skill afforded her special privileges, mainly exemption from Robert's attempts to force himself on her. I was not so lucky. I had no discernible skills beyond taking abuse without complaint and remaining invisible. My view of the world was narrowed to what was provided by the commune. Cheryl sometimes talked of life in an actual town, but the idea sounded alien to me. So out of reach, it may as well have been the kingdom of God that Robert promised would be coming any day now. It was 1988 when something actually happened. I'd grown up slender but strong over the past 15 years alongside all the other commune kids. They moved me into the men's hall, which proved no different from the kids' quarters, save for the fact that Robert's closest followers also slept in there and kept an even closer eye on us. But I knew how to keep on their good side. My mind turned to autopilot during our repenting sessions. My talks with Cheryl were always out in the open, far away from the prying ears of God, and I took Robert's drunken punishments with the humility expected of a good little disciple. His long-winded rambling still held considerable sway over me, making me fear the outer world beyond our commune, and I longed for the day his rapture would arrive. But talking with Cheryl and remembering the kindness of Ali and the desperation of Anthony kept me from fully believing in his words, from giving myself over to him mind, body, and soul. The day our judgment day arrived in 1988, I was prepping food in the mess hall when a commotion near the chapel drew commune members out into the cold winter air. Paul and John held Allie between them. She was struggling and protesting as they dragged her into the chapel. "Thought you could just up and leave, huh?" Paul growled roughly. "Let's see if our prophet agrees." I made to follow, but sharp nails snatched my bicep. I turned to find Cheryl looking up at me pleadingly. She sported a fresh bruise on the side of her head and blood crusted above her lower lip. "Please," she begged. "You can't help her, not in there, but you could be of use if you come with me." I heard the sound of cries and protests in the chapel, followed by Robert shouting angrily and the unmistakable crack of his belt. Ali was too tough to scream outright, but the moans she made when the belt buckle found flesh churned my stomach. A sordid expression of pain that could only be made by someone intimate with it. Turning back to Cheryl, I nodded almost imperceptibly. "Thank you," she gasped. With surprising force, she yanked me towards Robert's hut, explaining her plan as she went along. "It's my fault Allie's being punished. We've been discussing leaving, and one of Robert's men must have overheard. I told her what I'm about to tell you." I regarded her cautiously, her deep brown eyes alive with fright and something else, the possibility of escape. "There's a telephone in his hut," she continued. "It's the only one here. It's how he keeps us from calling home or friends or—" She trailed off, but I knew what she would say next. Help. Someone to come and save us from the shadow of a maniacal prophet's lust for absolute religious control. My heart beat faster at the prospect. Cheryl noted the difference in my face. "There's something no one ever told you about your mother," she whispered as we trudged along the splintery wall of the hut, snow licking our boots. "After you were taken from her, she began breathing again in the wheelbarrow. She needed medical attention badly, but she was alive. I wanted to take her to a hospital, but Robert came out after us and told us to leave her in the snow." She was crying now, and I looked around to make sure no one overheard us. Slowly, I wrapped my arms around her and held her. Inside, my mind was reeling with conflicted feelings. The last of my fear toward Robert sliding away and a dark mass of anguish and anger welling up in its place. Cheryl released a shuddery breath. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I promise. If you help me, I'll call the police and bring them here. I just need someone to stand lookout." She looked up at me and I nodded again. Together we headed for the hut. No one was inside, so Cheryl quickly slipped in while I stood at the corner trying not to look conspicuous. I listened to her shuffle around the filthy, cramped nest of our prophet, which was strewn with bottles of beer, torn Bibles, ragged clothes, cans of food, and items of punishment. Belts, whips, and that accursed sledgehammer. An ancient black phone lay beside a stained mattress. Cheryl picked it up from its cradle and dialed 911. She cried with relief when a dial tone came through and an operator answered. "Hello?" "Yes, my name is Cheryl Lamont. I live in a commune outside Sainte Marie and want to report Robert Gauthier to the police for what? Rape, abuse, starvation, imprisonment. She looked back at me and swallowed hard. Murder. Whatever the operator said next, neither of us heard as a powerful hand clamped down on my shoulder and ripped me from the doorway. I spun out into the snow, landing hard on my tailbone. Above me loomed Robert. His disciples stood to either side of him, looking amused. Well, looks like all my little sheep aren't as devout as I'd prayed. Robert lifted a hand and smacked me across the chin. My head snapped back and I tasted blood. Snow grated against my spine, and I briefly imagined this must be how my mother had felt when she was left to die in the cold. Fury took hold of me, and I yanked back my foot to snap a kick at Robert's knee. My heel connected with his shin, and he gave a startled grunt, toppling into the slush. Only Paul and Carver kept him from falling completely. Why, you sacrilegious little shitheel? He planted a foot in my groin, and my world turned red. My mouth flew open in a soundless gasp. "Grab the little fucker," he ordered. Paul and Carver seized me by my shoulders and wrenched my arms behind my back, dragging me to my knees in the process. John came out of the hut with Cheryl in his hands. She cried out as Robert turned on her and punched her in the stomach. "She managed to get an operator," John grunted. "Don't know if they'll come." "Let's imagine they will," Robert snarled. "I want these two shits out of sight before they get here." They were going to kill us, I realized. Kill us and dump us somewhere. I had to get their attention on me and away from Cheryl. Give her and Allie and all the others some semblance of a fighting chance. I had to make Robert so angry he would want nothing more than to punish me, even if it meant exposing himself to the police. Without thinking, I snapped my head backward into Carver's nose. Cartilage collapsed under my skull with a therapeutic crunch, and he broke away howling. Ribbons of blood erupted from both nostrils, saturating the ground with splatters of red. I broke free, ran at Robert, and tackled him into the snow. He yelled out, but not before I landed a double-fisted blow that cracked several of his teeth. He roared, and John released Cheryl to help Paul yank me off him. Carver grabbed the sledgehammer from the hut and raised it to kill me when Robert screamed, "No, the police, you fucking idiot. You do that and we're fucked. Blood all over the buildings and ground. They'd have a fucking field day." Staggering to his feet, Robert reached into his mouth and extracted a shard of tooth. He gazed at it in the half-light before curling his hand into a fist and slugging me in the stomach. I gaped like a fish as nausea twisted my guts into knots. Dropping to my knees once more, I felt Cheryl lunge forward to catch me. "Thank you," she whispered into my ear. Then it was Robert shoving her aside and crouching before me. "You know all these years and I never heard you make a sound." Robert hissed inches from my face. He bared his brown teeth and blood-blackened beard. "I think today will be the day that you do." He nodded to John and Paul. "Take him. We're going to take him up to the mine shaft and get rid of him before the police come." A quick glance at Cheryl. "You, we will deal with after." Robert left Paul behind to keep watch over things. Carver and John were conscripted to keep. My arms trussed to my back where they felt ready to burst from my sockets. Together they frog-marched me out of the commune and up the hill to the mine shaft. I turned to look back at my home for the past 17 years. Paul grabbed Cheryl roughly and shoved her toward the chapel where Allie waited with a gaunt look on her face. She caught sight of me but said nothing as Paul sent Cheryl stumbling into her arms, and all three of them disappeared into the old building. The other members of Robert's congregation continued living their life as though nothing had happened. For them, this was simply another bleak day of their existence. By the time we reached the shaft, a gaping black maw in the side of the hill, Robert was panting heavily. Years of poor health, cold air, excess drinking, and no proper medical care had rendered him gaunt. His arms poked out at the joints and his skin shone in irregular patches of white and red. John and Carver didn't look much better. Carver with his nose and John by virtue of the brutal life in the commune. They surrounded me as I was shoved to the hard-packed earth of the shaft's entrance. "Here," Robert said, "is where you meet your God." He wasted no time in laying into me. John and Carver followed suit. All three of them landed enthusiastic kicks, punches, and slaps that stung my flesh in the winter air. My vision swam when a powerful backhand caught my temple. The breath in my lungs abandoned me with A brutal kick to my abdomen. I eventually found myself collapsed on my side, dirt digging into my cheek as I stared down the mine. My final resting place. Her resting place. Robert nudged my bruised side with his foot. You know I cannot allow anyone to risk our salvation. I was called by the Lord on high to deliver us from the evils of the world. All the wicked will be struck and burnt away. Amen, Carver and John echoed. They made a cross across their chests. I curled in on myself, my heart pounding against my rib cage. I crawled toward the shaft. The dirt tore into the pads of my fingers, cutting them as I scooted on inch by inch. Robert helped by slamming his foot into my backside. Grit filled my mouth. I closed my eyes, letting him draw in closer so he could gloat more. We dumped your mother down there the day you slithered out of her, you know. She lingered a while after, but now she's nothing more than bones in the darkness. Her evil is buried down there where no one can ever be tainted by it again. Now you can join her, mother and child. My last act of whatever Robert was going to say next never passed his lips. The sharp rock I'd managed to grab while crawling deeper into the shaft did its work, beautifully cutting into Robert's Achilles tendon with hardly any resistance. The great prophet screamed hideously and toppled over into the dirt, blood sheeting from his crippled ankle. John and Carver were both stunned for the briefest of moments. But that allowed me enough time to lunge to my feet and smash the rock into Carver's already ruined nose. The sound he made as the stone stripped the cartilage from his face entirely sounded more beautiful to me than any prayer. A ragged hole was left where his nose had once been, and he staggered back, wheezing and gurgling. I shoved him back and whirled around into the giant fist, swinging out at me with the force of a train. It slammed into my ear, and my vision in my right eye darkened almost to nothing. My cracked skull lurched, threatening to give, but I hung in there. Years of passiveness festered within. All those atrocities I'd witnessed, the awful things, I never resisted. It all came rushing out as I absorbed John's punch. Luckily, the man was no proper fighter. The punch forced him to overbalance, and I took the opportunity to smash my fist into his throat. My blow had little force behind it, but it struck flush against his Adam's apple. He choked and took a step back, his boot coming down right on Robert's exposed ankle. The smaller man screeched like the devil, and John slipped on top of him. My entire body screamed in agony as I limped over to John and brought the spiked rock down on his eye. I had to incapacitate him more than anyone else. The big man yelled out as the rock pierced his skull, and he ripped the stone out of my hands. Blood and white jelly pulped across his socket. I rolled off as he thrashed backward toward a small cliff just below the shaft's entrance. A moment later, he toppled over the edge. He landed headfirst on the pile of rocks that housed Anthony's remains. His spine made unnaturally sharp sounds. The big man went limp. My attention hazed out for a moment as the vision in my bad eye flickered on and off like a faulty light switch. I turned to see Carver come back to his feet, and he lurched toward me in spurts of darkness. His nose clung to his face by just the barest shreds of skin. His voice sounded nasal and desperate. "Gunathil, yeah, futhing Bathard." He almost managed to get the better of me. Carver reached towards me and launched a kick at my right knee. He connected my leg, buckled. As I came down, his knee shot forward and cracked off my forehead. I felt the momentum whip my head back. The world spun, but I somehow stayed conscious. I caught my balance and drove my head back into his stomach, winding him. He staggered, his face a mass of purple and red. As he stumbled, something sharp cut into my calf like fire. I looked back to see Robert had dragged himself over to plunge a hunting knife into my leg. The bright blade gleamed against my skin, and blood welled in the wound. Without thinking, I reached back and yanked it free to slice across Carver's belly, as the noseless man came stumbling toward me one final time. The blade caught him just above the hip bone and opened his abdomen up like tissue paper. Pale pink, intestine and marbled fat slid out onto the cold ground, followed closely by the man they belonged to. Carver's face contorted into a rictus of pain and suffering as the life slithered from his eyes. When he hit the ground, he still somehow managed to cling to it long enough to fix me with a loathing glare. Pure hatred burned in his eyes. Then fear. Then nothing. He expired there, holding his guts like a newborn babe in his hands. I breathed heavily and checked behind me to ensure no more surprise attacks would be coming. John and Carver taught me well enough to expect pain at every turn. Luckily, Robert's fucked up tendon occupied his attention. He looked startlingly vulnerable at that moment, mewling, clutching his ruined ankle, rocking back and forth while hunched over his injured leg. I wondered what had driven him into creating this hell in the frigid wilderness of Canada. Surely he hadn't intended evil and suffering to become his tools of choice in ruling his doomsday commune. But they did. Or perhaps he didn't see his actions as evil at all. He pursued the grace of his Lord, the heavenly angels that would scour the earth for him and ascend him up to heaven, and he did so at the cost of those who followed him so blindly. Time and drink had warped him into a bitter, cruel man who knew only how to govern through fear, damnation, and abuse. Torturous routines of his devising that cost me and so many others their sanity. I barely felt a thing when he gazed up at me pleadingly and whispered, "Help me, please." Rising to my feet, I stumbled over to him, knelt and pinched the end of his exposed tendon. His howls rolled across the white fields. He snarled at me and tried once more to grab me, so I crunched the hilt of his knife into his jaw. He flopped, back on the stony ground, the lip of the shaft rising above him like a mouth. I only wished to deliver the world from evil, he whispered. His eyes were unfocused now. I'd broken his jaw and his words curled out in slurry clumps. "Call down. God's angels. Make things right." I stabbed him. Again and again and again. Everywhere. Anywhere the blade would reach. Up to the hilt. Metal parted, flesh and blood answered, seeping out in long, coppery rivulets. He groaned but didn't have the energy to scream. My last thrust found his throat, and he went silent. Collapsing back into the dirt, I heard the first wail of sirens crawl through the countryside. Their sound seemed foreign in this desolate land, a place where Robert's maniacal beliefs had somehow evolved into righteous law. I realized our beliefs were what we made them. He prayed for the world to be delivered from evil, so I answered. Story 9, one-word story. Have you ever played one-word story? It's a very simple game. A few people take turns going around to make a sentence. Each person adds one word until the sentence is complete, then someone says period, and it's read back. It's actually pretty fun if you play with the right people, but I'm pretty antisocial and only have 1 or 2 friends. They don't like the game as much as I do, so I use a random chat site to play with strangers. It's completely anonymous, so my identity is supposed to be safe. Anyway, it was late afternoon on a Saturday, and I was in the middle of a game when my apartment went dark. It was probably caused by the weird heat. All week, other tenants in my building had complained about the power cutting short around this. It only lasted a few minutes, but when the power came back on, I saw I had been disconnected from the site. When I tried to re-enter, I couldn't. It kept crashing or something, and I kept getting disconnected. I'm easily bored, and was a little more than pissed that I hadn't finished my game. So I took to Google and searched chat room anonymous one-word story. After 0.8223 seconds, I had 23,000 results. I scrolled down the page and tried a few sites out, but either the players weren't very good, or I was led to an anonymous sex chat site. It wasn't until the 3rd page of results that I found something interesting. Microfiction.com. I clicked the heading and entered the site. Then I logged in as a guest. I was really surprised to see how dedicated this site was to an overall simple game. Mystery, parody, anime, music, cartoons, horror, film, superstition, and superhero were just a few of the categories that people could use to play one-word story. For no particular reason, I went to mystery first and played a few short games. Then I went to horror, then to music, and to a few others. Eventually, I went to take a bathroom break and made sure to bookmark the site so I could visit it in the future. The site was pretty well managed. Under each main heading, for example, horror, there were subheadings. These were games being hosted by members. Some games only had a few people in them, others had 30 or 40. Some were open to anyone. Others were private games that you could only get into if you had a password that the host had sent you. I played for a few hours, really enjoying myself because everyone here took the game just seriously enough to make each sentence interesting, and also had enough fun to make the whole story funny to read out loud, while still making sense. It was 10 now, and 10:30 was my self-imposed bedtime, so I resigned to play one more game before going to sleep. Going to Mystery for the last time that night, I found a private game. Being a guest on the site, I couldn't message the person to ask to join, and I would have kept looking for a public game except that the page froze. I refreshed it and saw that the game had been changed to public, with room for one person. I thought about that. A one-on-one game of one-word story, and I felt excited at the possibility that this guy would be just as good as I was, and we could create something really unique. So I joined. The host, username Doppelganger21, went first. I appeared on the screen almost instantly. I was impressed with this guy's bravery, as using I in this game usually led to embarrassing sentences in the long run. So I rewarded him with a simple enough word that would keep the sentence going. See. He responded almost immediately with, you. This was honestly a very amateur tactic. It would make the game harder to finish, and the unsettling approach was never enough to make me quit. I decided to humor him though and typed through. His response, your. I thought about where the sentence was going and noticed that my living room window was still open from the afternoon. I typed window. His response was a period, signaling the end of the sentence. I see you through your window. I chuckled to myself, realizing this guy was a creep. A player who tries to make unsettling or disturbing sentences to scare his opponents into leaving the game. He probably had a friend with him, and they were thinking up ways to scare me. I didn't blame them. My sister and I did that last Halloween when I babysat for my parents. I started the next sentence. You. His reply, are. My reply, not. His reply, safe. My reply was a period ending the sentence. You are not safe. Again, I chuckled and watched as he started the next sentence. I appeared on the screen. I typed am, which was followed by coming. I thought about ending the sentence there, as a slight punishment against the guy for not taking the game seriously. Instead, I typed for, to see if he would type what I thought he would. He typed you. I was right on the money and typed a period. I'm coming for you. It wasn't funny anymore, just boring. There was a chat, so I used it to tell the guy to cut the creep stuff. I told him it wasn't funny, and if he didn't cut it out, I would leave the game. He actually replied, "Look out your window." That caught me off guard, but I did what I was told. Across the street, a light post had burned out its bulb, which I hadn't noticed before. It was pretty dark, and I couldn't really make out any shapes. I turned back to the monitor. Doppelganger had typed I, and I saw in the chat that he had posted another comment. Basically, he was telling me what to write. I was becoming fed up with him, but 10:30 was just 5 minutes away, so I reasoned to just finish and did as he asked. I typed have, he typed a, I typed gun, he typed to, I typed your, he typed head. I finished the sentence with a period. I have a gun to your head. I sighed aloud and closed my eyes, stretching at my desk. I just wanted this game to be over. It was my turn, and he had sent me another list of words, so I typed I. He typed am, I typed at. He typed your, I typed window. He typed a period, I am at your window. Reading it aloud, I realized the game was over. We had made the story relate to our first sentence. Out of habit, I read every sentence out loud. I see you through your window. You are not safe. I am coming for you. I have a gun to your head. I am at your window. I finished reading and rested my head against my chair, yawning. I was drowsy and thought about sleeping in my chair when a loud cracking sound echoed across the empty street outside. And I noticed the crack that was spiderwebbing from the center of my computer monitor. I blinked to full alertness and saw it, the glint of a bullet sticking out of my screen. I turned my head behind me and screamed as I saw someone in a mask staring in through my window. Out of panic, I dashed out of my chair and into my bedroom. I hid in the closet under a thick pile of dirty laundry and waited, trying to control my rapid breathing as my eyes adjusted to the uncomfortable darkness. It was a few minutes before I heard soft footsteps. The maniac was in my bedroom. I could see his dark boots and leather pants. He fired the gun again at my bed sheets. He must have thought I was hiding in the covers. He rummaged through my drawers and took something that I thought was money, or my prescription medicine. I saw him stalk towards my bathroom and fire a shot into the shower. He looked around in there before turning around and looking under my bed. He was almost level with the floor, so I could see his features. He was at least 6 feet and dressed in all black except for his mask, which was white with red tear tracks under the eyes and a painted set of crooked, beast-like teeth. He seemed to see perfectly in the dark. I could really only see him because his clothes seemed to be darker than the already lightless interior of my bedroom. After what felt like hours, he stood up and walked out of my room. I stayed in my closet all night, eventually falling asleep, covered in my unclean socks and underwear. I smelled horrible in the morning, and the first thing I did was take a shower. As I did, I stepped on the bullet that had torn a hole in my shower curtains. Afterwards, I called the police, who told me to come down to the station. I got ready to go, but couldn't find my keys anywhere. While looking through the drawers of my desk, I complained internally about my monitor being busted. I could still see the site, the chat room, and the game, and took a picture of it with my phone for the police. Now, in the kitchen looking for my keys, it hit me that I had kept them in my dresser drawer, and ran into my room to see that what the psycho had taken was my keys. I groaned, and was about to call my buddy for a ride, when I accidentally opened my photo gallery. I was very annoyed with myself until I took another look at the picture I had taken. Something was different in the picture than I had remembered from last night. There was a new line in the chat. A single word. A simple question. A word I had used so many times over the words after a game was over. I never thought that this word would send shivers down more spine nor turn my blood to ice in my veins. Rematch? Story 10, the sneak. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I've always been naturally sneaky. Without putting any effort into the endeavor, I was always scaring people, or at the very least making them jump. Sometimes even when I approached from the front, people wouldn't notice me until I was right upon them. Then they would gasp and flinch and ask me why I snuck up on them. I guess I'm just naturally quiet and unobtrusive. As I got into my teen years, I got better at it. I would be there one moment, and after looking away for a mere second or two, I would be gone. Or, of course, vice versa, appearing seemingly from out of nowhere. A joke even began to manifest itself around my high school that I was related to, usually the son of, Michael Myers, because of my seemingly preternatural ability to know the precise moment when someone was going to look away from where I was. Also, being named Michael didn't help any. I remember walking into anatomy class one day 20 minutes late, and the teacher never even noticed. Neither did most of the students. And I didn't even try. I was late. Oh well, wasn't the first time and wouldn't be the last. I just walked in the door, set my books down, and sat in my seat, having a last name near the front of the alphabet. I even had a seat in the front row. When the teacher finally noticed, she said something to the effect of, "Oh, I'm sorry, Michael, I had you marked as absent." She corrected her mistake in the attendance book and went on with class. It was around then that I began to actually practice this peculiar ability. We all know what they say, practice makes perfect, and boy did I ever get good at sneaking. In fact, I think I actually added new verbs into my repertoire. I excelled at sneaking and also creeping, sidling, slinking, and skulking. I actually bought and read a book on ninja techniques for hiding, diversion, and silent movement. I even went as far as to rent and watch all the old Halloween movies so I could study how Michael Myers actually did his silent creeping, despite him being a fictitious character from a movie, with all the benefits of special effects and camera trickery. Every October, I volunteered to work in the local haunted house, and whatever room they placed me in was routinely noted by customers to be the scariest in the entire place. At some point, I acquired a certain pride over my ability, happy that I was able to do something that few, if any others, could not. To say the least, I had gotten pretty proficient at this odd God-given talent. I know what you're all probably thinking. At some point, I'm going to begin using my stealth abilities to go on some sort of rampage, stalking and dispatching my enemies in terrifying horror movie-worthy murders. However, I am a peaceful and non-violent young man, and had no designs with my ability for anything more than occasional benefits and harmless practical jokery. This preface concerning my ability is essential if one is to believe the veracity of my story, which happened a few years ago. I don't recall the exact day or date. I believe it was either Tuesday or Wednesday. I was still living with my father as a poor, but working 20-year-old on the corner of our street, in literally the corner of our exurb, bordered on 3 sides by a nice forest that went for a few miles before running into the lake. It's not like we lived rurally or anything, but our section of town was pretty secluded and out of the way. I returned home after work on the night in question, exasperated and ready to relax. My pops wasn't around, which wasn't odd. He often spent long nights down at the bar with some of his old union pals. I unwound for a while, enjoying the freedom the empty house presented, playing my tunes as loud as I desired, and smoking like a chimney. After I deemed I had enjoyed a sufficient amount of recreation, I settled down and prepared to actually get some things done. Seeing as how there was a full load in the laundry basket, I grabbed it and headed for the basement, where the washer and dryer were located. When I was younger, I hated going into my basement. Like any other unfinished basement, it's dark, it's musty, it's stone cold and hard, and there are innumerable shadows and places for all nature of dark beings to hide. Plus, when going down the steps into my basement, you're walled in on both sides until you reach the very bottom. So there's no way to see what manner of ghosts or monsters may be lurking down there, waiting to jump on you and rend you to pieces. As time went on, however, that irrational fear began to fade, until it might as well have been a ghost itself. So, basket in hands, I had decided to make the trip to the basement as stealthily as possible, always proud to use and practice my ability, especially when hindered in some way, carrying something, noisy clothes, creaky floorboards, etc. Quick, deliberate steps, careful to distribute as much of my weight across as much surface area of my foot as possible, always planting toe first when going downstairs. I was successful in descending the basement steps, silent as the grave, even skipping the third to the last step because there was simply no way to put weight on said stair without it making a creak of some kind. A diversion or additional ambient noise would be needed to use that stair without spoiling the effect. No need to turn on any lights. Although it was well after 8 p.m., the summer sun was only starting to dip below the tree line, filling the basement with streams of auburn light falling in from the few windows. Besides, this was a stealth mission, no lights allowed. When I got to the bottom step, though, I froze. Since I had made absolutely no noise on the way down, it was easy for me to recognize odd sounds coming from the basement just around the corner to the right. The left was just more wall. Nothing loud and overpowering, just a low, gruff sort of grunting. There were other noises as well accompanying the grunting. A soft kind of scraping, maybe. The noises conjured visions of one of those gremlins from the movies of the same name, trying to push a huge, heavy trunk across the floor little by little. I wondered if perhaps my dad was the source of these sounds, but that didn't make any sense. He certainly would have heard me jamming earlier, and he absolutely hates it when I crank up my tunes. It's not like him to refrain from coming upstairs and telling me to knock off the racket. And what would he be doing down there for hours anyway? So if it wasn't my father, it had to be some critter from the woods that found its way in and was probably trying to make off with some food it had found. Many animals are known for their ability to hear and smell far better than us humans. I wondered if perhaps I were good enough in my stealth abilities to sneak up on an animal that was probably very aware of its surroundings, seeing as how they can be eaten, or any number of horrible things if they are not observant and alert at all times. It presented an interesting challenge to my strange skill, so I clenched my jaw, tensed my muscles, and prepared to make the attempt. And once again, I froze. The weird sort of grunting became a vocalization of a different sort, and louder. It sounded like actual words being spoken, albeit in a language I couldn't comprehend. However, it still sounded as if it were a gremlin making the noise, or at the very least some old crone who smoked 3 packs a day. The language itself was intriguing. It sounded a lot like Latin or something similar, but definitely was not. After a few moments of genuine interest, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I was too preoccupied with my musings to realize something. This was no animal. There was a person in my basement. A person who was doing God knows what, other than speaking in tongues? What the hell was going on down there? My heart rate instantly doubled, but being a strapping, macho young man, even with no one around, I wasn't about to let myself be scared by some strange old foreign woman, or whoever the hell had broken into my basement. It was then that I got a little angry. How dare someone break into my house? This was where I lived. What kind of dirtbag would just break into someone's house? Right about the time my nape hairs and goosebumps had retreated to their normal positions, a new sound began emanating from the basement. This one louder but completely alien to me. I had never heard anything like this before in my life, or since, and describing it proves difficult. It was something between a powerful gust of air and a high-pitched metal scraping on metal sound, both occurring simultaneously. That's the best I can do, and trust me, whatever sound you've conjured in your head to imitate it, most likely doesn't come close. Seeing as this was the only time in my life that I've ever heard the noise, I may not even remember it correctly. All I know is this sound scared the bejesus out of me. Strapping young man or not, this unnatural sound went right through my ears, bypassed my brain and cut straight to my spine, unleashing a cold rush within me and freezing my limbs in place. My eyes gaped wide, and I'm pretty sure my eyelids were non-existent at this point, because I could not bring myself to shut them or even squint a little bit. The sound happened and quickly faded, but still here I stood, on the bottom landing of the basement steps, still unable to see around the corner into the rest of the basement. Thankfully, whatever was on the other side of the wall couldn't see me either. I hoped. Standing there doing my very best statue imitation was not easy at this point. Sweaty palmed, breath firmly imprisoned in chest, eyes as dinner plates. I think it was about then that I began to actually fear for my safety, and I wished I hadn't been holding that goddamned clothes basket. It was also about then that that weird language began again. Deliberate, but incomprehensible words. After a few more moments of listening to this infernal monologue, my curiosity simply got the better of me. All fear aside, I simply had to see what was happening in my basement on the other side of the wall, and so I exhaled as quietly as I could, drew in another deep breath, and noiselessly, slowly began to lean forward. Little by little, more and more of the basement was slowly revealed to my personal panorama. First, the old 8 million-pound tube, TV that should have been thrown out decades ago. No mysterious guests so far. Next, the workbench further back, tools in place and undisturbed. No monsters, ghosts, or creatures there. Then towards the back corner, the washer and dryer, undisturbed and silently standing sentinel in their normal place. And next, holy shit. As quickly and silently as a ninja's ghost, I re-straightened my spine, standing upright and stock still. If my eyes were like dinner plates before, they were as satellite dishes now. I had seen it. I had seen what was speaking in that unnerving voice, in my basement. But what exactly had I seen? It was humanoid, bipedal, and crouched, down near the ground. I didn't get too good of a look at it since I shot straight back out of sight before IT saw me. What in the hell was that? If that was human, that was one hell of a costume. All my initial espying had yielded was a purplish-reddish ball of fur covering a vaguely human body, crouched low near the ground and speaking in that horrid tone and cadence. Whatever it was, I had never seen anything like it before. I wasn't sure if anyone had. Seems my odd skill did come in handy, because if it heard me or detected my presence in any way, it did not display it. Although I couldn't see it, the monstrous chanting never slowed, stopped, or even broke cadence, leading me to believe it hadn't noticed my sweating, shaking presence. Listening closer to what it was saying, it was clear these were definitely words, and not just some strange, guttural groans or random atypical vocalizations. This thing was speaking with purpose, with a defined goal on its mind that it was seeking to accomplish. But of course that inspired the questions. Who was it speaking to, if anyone? And what did it want? Almost instinctively, I began to slowly lean forward again. I was pretty positive this thing wasn't ordering a pizza or lilting one of its favorite tunes. If I wanted any hope of determining what this thing wanted, I needed to know more about just what the fuck it was. The thing had had its back to me when I peeked the first time so that I couldn't see the face or any details about its front. I hadn't leaned out far enough the first time to even see its head anyway. Slowly, inch by inch, and silent as the grave, I again leaned out past the wall. Here we go again, the old tube TV. The sun was steadily finding its way below the horizon, ceding space to the lengthening shadows. Then the workbench. Every inch I leaned seemed to add decibels to the wild incantations the thing was spitting out. Now the washer and dryer, muscles strained, adrenaline pumping, and then purple-red fur, including a blood-red tail. Fuck me. A tail. Again. On instinct, I straightened back out. Fuck balls. Okay. So it clearly wasn't human. I needed to stop ducking back behind the wall and just person up, unisex version of man up, so I could get a look at the intruder in my basement. Damn it. I wished, again, that I hadn't been holding that fucking laundry basket. My spine had seemingly just reformed itself into solid matter again when the chanting stopped, and that horrid metallic wind noise began again, remelting my spine and causing my heart to beat so hard I was afraid the thing on the other side of the wall might hear it. After what seemed like hours, but surely was only a minute or two, the wind metal noise stopped and, predictably, the vicious chanting and dreadful scraping resumed. I should have went back up the stairs when I had a chance, but was compelled to get a firm look at this being. I mean, how often does one discover a previously unheard-of creature making noise in their basement? Was it aggressive or amicable? Benign or dangerous? And what the fuck was it doing? In my basement, was it a demon? An animal? A mythical creature of some kind, like a little violet and red Sasquatch? I had to know. And so, with courageous curiosity, beating out debilitating fear, I began to lean out once again. You know the drill. Old TV should have been thrown out years ago. Workbench. Looks like Dad could use a new crescent wrench. Washer and dryer. Would I ever get to do the load of laundry, sweatily clutched in my arms? And finally, it came into view. Wispy red fur, leading to a slender, slightly curved and motionless tail. The blood-red crimson of its tail darkened into various hues of violet and purple, deepening in color as it got closer to the torso. It was crouched on its two legs, indeed bipedal, and had a wild mane of shocked, wispy red and purple hair coming off its head in an Einstein-Ian sort of afro, only with longer strands than the deceased German physicist. The hair was clumped, in places in dread-like protrusions that ran down the back of the body, giving the appearance of spikes running down its spine and the back of the arms. Its body was slender but wiry, and all of it that I could see was covered in that same blood-red fur that descended into a deep violet as it got closer to the center of the body. The feet were furred, up unto the very tips, and kind of resembled a cat's paws. It was completely still except for movements it was making with its hands, or forepaws or claws or whatever the hell it had, and small undulations with its head, coinciding with its wicked-sounding cadence. It was impossible to say for sure, but it looked like if it stood up, it would be about my height, 6'2", give or take a few inches. I watched it for a little while, my fright-induced adrenaline enabling me to hold stone still, whilst this being went on about its surely nefarious business. The oration and scraping were simple enough to figure out, but even through my fear I was very curious about what that metallic whooshing was about. I leaned out just a bit farther, as far as I would dare, in hopes of getting a look at what, if anything, this creature was crouched over. Whatever it was, it had to be pretty small because the slender being greatly obscured what it was crouched over. All I could obtain during this time were quick glances of an indistinguishable black object. The chanting itself became more haunting and sinister on this side of the wall, sounding as if there were 2 or 3 beings speaking in unison. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might literally leave a bruise on my chest, and I noticed for the first time that I had such an absolute death grip on the laundry basket that the plastic edges were digging painfully into my hands. My breath was shallow and silent, and I was pretty sure my eyes hadn't shut even once in the past 3 to 5 minutes. I watched in graveyard silence, undetected, while this being went on about its work. Before much longer, it stopped all movement, the scraping and vocalizing again ceasing. Without warning or preamble, the creature raised both arms above its head. In that time, I could see that its hands and fingers were furred as well, except the palms, and colored in that same dark crimson as the tail and feet. Its fingers were human-like, with opposable thumbs, but there was one very defining characteristic. The index, or pointer fingers on each hand were extraordinarily long. They were at least twice as long as the other fingers, and furred only about halfway up, with long black protrusions jutting out of the red fur. At first I thought they were fingernails, but they were pliable and appeared jointed like a normal finger. A normal human finger anyway. They were very fine and slender, ever so slightly curved, pointed at the tip, and looked like they were probably very sharp. The appearance of the sinister-looking claws did not do well to reconcile my mania. In addition to its size, this creature also came equipped with features that would enable it to seriously injure or kill me, and all I had was this fucking laundry basket. I didn't even have my pocket knife on me. I suppose I could have used a pair of knee socks like nunchucks, but I doubt a parodied ninja weapon would be much use against those claws. It was all a moot point anyway, because almost immediately after raising its arms, I forgot to mention that it raised its arms in a crisscross fashion, because those claws kinda took precedence at that moment. It brought them down again, uncrossing them as it did, and producing that whooshing noise, a process which it repeated over and over again. It also abraded its claws together as it swept its arms downward, which produced the high-pitched metallic scraping noise. Being able to see the thing also added a new phenomenon to the mix. As it brought its hands downward, the abrasion of its two claws appeared to create some kind of energy, evidenced by a reddish glow emanating from the hands. The glow grew more and more intense with each X-shaped swipe of its talons. After a dozen or more repetitions, its hands were barely visible, with dark red auras resembling crackling clouds of crimson smoke surrounding its hands. When it finally stopped, I could perceptively feel the energy coming from its hands, like it was creating a soft wind or gently pushing against me. Not enough to move me, but enough to be perceived. You'd have to experience it to truly understand. But it felt nasty somehow, almost viscous or slimy. It placed its hands on the small black object in front of it. I still couldn't tell what it was, and resumed its perturbing incantations. At this point, I was completely lost. Mentally, I had nothing, which isn't far removed from normal, and all I could do was stare, wide-eyed and gaping. Shock, fear, and amazement all amalgamated into a single 1,000-pound medicine ball being bounced around my head, replacing my normally functioning brain. With no activity going on up top, my eyes and muscles decided I was to keep standing there like a lump and see what happens. I found out later that my fight or flight instincts didn't fail, but simply didn't activate because the creature didn't know I was there, and choosing one of those options would have alerted it to my presence. Thank you, instincts. The POW. Incantations were really creeping me out. I desperately wanted to see what it was crouched over, feeling that this bit of information was immediately valuable to my well-being. I would swear that the creature was saying the words louder than before, and as it went on this time, its voice definitively began to rise. The increase in noise gave me the little fortitudinal boost I needed to attempt stepping out and peeking at what the creature was crouched over. With great care, I took a single noiseless step out onto the concrete floor, still gripping the ridiculous basket of clothes. With wide, probing eyes, I slowly leaned further. Just a tad bit more, and a sock fell out of the tilted basket in my hands, crashing softly to the floor, mere centimeters from colliding with the creature's foot. My muscles, every last one of them, tensed and froze. I quietly cursed myself in my head. And when I say quietly, I mean even my inner monologue whispered out of fear of being heard by the mysterious monster in my basement. I was now so close to it that I could detect an animalistic scent, somewhere between a lush, sweet forest breeze and the slight stink of a rotting carcass. The creature seemed oblivious, though, and after ensuring nothing else would jeopardize my stealth, I prepared to take the final step that would afford me a view of what the creature was crouched over. I was successful, and it afforded me a view of what the creature had in front of it. 'Twas a kitten. That's right. It was a little black kitten, lying motionless on the floor. It looked dead to my eyes, and its fur was matted with blood, more blood than this little kitty could have possibly contained. Its entire coat was absolutely smattered with it. I knew this kitten. It had belonged to a family a few houses down. It was part of a litter their full-grown tabby had just had. It was the only black one of the bunch, and it had died a week or so after being born, the family knew not how. By what manner this goblinous being had come to possess it, I knew not how. Or why. The absurdity of the situation I found myself in seemed to know no bounds. The creature's hands were still illuminated with those snapping clouds of crimson energy, and it was moving them all about the dead kitten, almost like a magician would before doing a sleight of hand trick. The light and energy given off by its aura-enclosed hands was sickly and felt dangerous, but at the same time was beautiful and mesmerizing. It was a strange juxtaposition to experience. I wasn't sure, but I felt like the energy that this being was manipulating could greatly harm me, or possibly be amazingly beneficial, kind of like fire. Applied correctly, its uses are virtually endless and remarkably beneficial, but it can also be exploited for very dire and horrid purposes. In retrospect, I feel like the power this being was utilizing could be employed in a similar fashion. This monstrous, demonic-looking creature looked apparently ready to use such energy. At this point, I began to wonder, should I try to stop this thing? It didn't seem to be up to anything cataclysmic like the destruction of the earth or the enslavement of all mankind. I'd like to think such things cannot be accomplished with some energy, albeit of an unknown origin, and a dead kitten. But all I had was my feeble human musculature and a fucking laundry basket full of clothes. This thing probably had all the agility and ferocity of a mountain lion, as movies and comics have taught me all creatures of this manner do. Not to mention it had either stayed hidden for however long it had been alive, or had killed anyone who had ever seen it before. Not promising prospects for my future. This had been foolish of me. There was no way to know there would be a frightening monster doing God knows what to a dead kitten in my basement, but it had been my decision to investigate further. That was just stupid. I should have tried to creep back up the steps to call the cops or grab a weapon or anything other than sneaking up on an unknown monster that could surely do horrible things to me. So there I was, standing there sweating, heart pounding, mouth agape, eyes opened wide, less than 2 feet from a previously unseen creature, holding a full laundry basket. Fear and common sense finally won out over curiosity, and I made the decision to try to sneak back upstairs. As I just started to slowly creep my way back to the landing, the creature's steadily louder orations began to crescendo, freezing me in place again. It flung its arms wide, hands still surrounded by the reddish-purple auras of energy it had conjured, and almost giving me a Charlie horse. As it spoke its final, indecipherable word, its voice now channeling Mum-Ra from the Thundercats cartoon, it thrust both hands, grabbing onto the kitten, transferring the red auras from its hands to the deceased catling. It seemed to be exerting itself, the bloody corona engulfing the kitten, swirling and billowing, and almost seeming to crackle with actual miniature lightning as the creature gently held its hands to it. I began to question my own sanity at this point. This situation I was in was getting more and more bizarre, almost as if I were dreaming. Just when I thought nothing stranger could occur, it would, pushing my heart rate and my sanity closer to the brink. I really have no idea how I didn't go running for the hills screaming bloody murder at this point. I guess I was literally too scared to run for my life. After a couple centuries passed, mere seconds I'm sure, the glow from the aura faded and eventually winked out. The creature removed its hands from the kitten slowly and to my surprise did not resume the chanting. This entire situation had blown all of my assumptions out of the water at every turn, so I decided not to make any and just watch. My brain must have secretly made assumptions without my approval. because I was stunned once again when the demonic-looking being began to speak again, only this time softly and directly to the kitten. It was practically cooing to the little creature. And even more amazing, the kitten answered back. It began to mewl softly, its tail lightly thumping the concrete. A moment later it stood up, and unless my eyes deceived me, it was no longer covered in blood. It took a few shaky steps, then proceeded to meow lovingly at the strange monster that had just resurrected it. Well, that was a relief. I half expected it to eat the kitten, or rip it apart, or turn it into some giant dire monster cat or something. It was such a relief, in fact, that I let out a loud and exasperated sigh, fully alerting the creature to my presence. Crap. The creature whirled immediately, and I finally got a look at its front and face. Especially the face, for when it turned around, it was right in my face, and it shrieked an unholy roar at me. Its face was leonine, especially with its wild red and purple mane of dreads, and the mouth and snout were protruded, further resembling a mutant jungle cat. It had fangs at the front of its jaw, top and bottom, with smaller fangs behind it forming a row that dove far into its mouth, which was spread wide as it roared at me, its hot breath like wind blown over a fire. I was close enough to notice horrid-looking bits of who knows what amidst the teeth and strands of saliva. It didn't roar for long. It wasn't a drawn-out, "I'm a T-Rex and I own the world" roar, but more of a primal scream. It took a wild swipe at my torso with a hand and one of those massive claws, but luckily, on pure instinct, I flinched. I raised the basket full of clothes, effectively parrying the strike, which was lucky because the basket received one hell of a gash. Also lucky was what happened next. It left. After the wild swipe, the creature made another noise, a more confused-sounding noise. In a flash, it turned, and on a combination of bipedal and quadrupedal movements, it almost instantly galloped, ran, leaped its way to the back wall by the washer and dryer. And amazingly, it didn't stop there, for as it made its way, its hands began glowing red again, and it jumped at and into the wall, red aura'd hands outstretched towards said wall. A moderate dark red explosion occurred, leaving a large cloud of crimson fumes, and when the scarlet smoke had cleared enough to see, there was no trace of the wild creature. I stood there dumbfounded. No, more than dumbfounded, flabbergasted. There was the possibility that the thing would return, try to claim the life of possibly the only eyewitness to its existence. But I just stood there. I eventually turned, the clothes basket in my hands, to see the long gash the creature had left in its side. The basket had a long wound ripped through one side. Some of the clothes were even ribboned too. The kitten was exploring the basement, mewling along oblivious as if it hadn't just been brought back from the dead by an unknown monster who just jumped through some kind of teleportational vortex, or whatever it had just utilized to leave my basement. I scooped the little feller up, threw him in the basket, and went back upstairs, mouth still agape. When I told my dad what had happened, he asked me for the number to my dealer. He also said we couldn't keep the cat. It worked out. I ended up giving it to my sister. There was no way I was just going to drop off a kitten that had just been resurrected by a strange being at the Humane Society. If the thing grows up to be a monster demon cat, it's my monster demon cat. She agreed to take care of the little guy. I tried to tell her the story of how I came to possess it, and my sister reacted in much the same way as my father. I figured she ought to know, considering the cat could turn out to be something sinister. And although she wasn't as skeptical as my father, I could tell she didn't believe me either. I didn't really expect her to. After that day, I spent considerable time searching online for any sort of link or connection to what I had just gone through. Everything I found was scant and vague. No pics, no stories, no nothing that even scarcely fit the description of what I had experienced. While researching the creature online is how I came across creepypasta actually. All I know is this. My sister still has the cat. He hasn't turned into any monstrous beings or exhibited a strange reddish glow, and I am stealthier than a silent ninja fart, for I snuck up on something that comes from the dark, hides in the shadows, and goes bump in the night, and I scared it.